Chapter 1556. The immortal crystal spiritual vein would belong to whoever killed Yu Shujin. Everyone expressed their support for Xiao Chen's proposal. After all, it was the fairest method. The first saints of various continents began to express their support. Then, hundreds of geniuses from the seventh wilderness also erupted with their terrifying power. For a moment, the geniuses from the two sides clashed. There were indeed a few geniuses from the seventh realm who were very strong. At least, they had reached the level of Sir God. The divine monarch, Tianmushi, Long Yang, and the other first sacred sons had already started fighting with the seventh realm's geniuses. However, there was no overwhelming scene. The seventh realm's geniuses weren't at a disadvantage at all. Both sides were locked in battle. Xiao Chen was also fighting fiercely with a genius from the seventh realm. This genius from the seventh realm had also reached the great completion of the quasi-saint realm. Like Xiao Chen, his strength was extremely terrifying and was not any weaker than Long Yang. This time, those who could enter the northern underworld celestial realm with Yu Shujin were the most monstrous geniuses from the seventh realm. Therefore, their strength could not be underestimated. However, as soon as they entered the northern underworld celestial realm, a fierce battle broke out between the two sides. Haha, seventh wilderness saint. Not bad. Interesting. The genius from the seventh realm who was fighting fiercely with Xiao Chen was a barbarian. He had a strong body and terrifying physical strength. Even if they were to compete purely on physical strength, Xiao Chen would be at a disadvantage. After a fierce battle, the genius from the seventh realm laughed loudly. He was also a little surprised by Xiao Chen's strength. It was indeed extraordinary that a human could cultivate his physical body to such a level. However, before he could finish speaking, Xiao Chen's dustless sword appeared in his hand with a thought. Seeing Xiao Chen's dustless sword, the genius from the seventh realm was surprised. Xiao Chen's physical body was terrifying, but he did not expect him to be a sword cultivator. Without wasting any time, Xiao Chen took out his Wu Chen sword. Then, he slashed out with his sword. The green lotus sword chi was unleashed instantly and slashed towards the young man from the brute tribe. The cyan lotus sword chi was a holy skill of high quality. Of course, its power couldn't be underestimated. However, the young man from the barbarian tribe wasn't simple either. He didn't try to dodge the cyan lotus sword chi. Instead, he punched the cyan lotus sword chi. The cyan lotus sword chi was destroyed by the young man's punch. He had successfully blocked Xiao Chen's green lotus sword chi. Moreover, he had blocked it head-on. The young man from the barbarian tribe withdrew the disdain in his eyes and spoke with a serious expression. "You are not bad. You are qualified to know my name. Remember, the person who killed you is called Shimeng." Shimeng. Although he wasn't as famous as Yu Shujin in the younger generation of the seventh realm, it was no exaggeration to say that he was the number one person below Yu Shujin and the number two genius of the younger generation of the seventh realm. Xiao Chen didn't expect to fight with the number two genius. Regarding this, he didn't know what to say. Should he say that he was lucky or unlucky? Shimeng didn't give Xiao Chen too much time to think. He took a step forward and disappeared in an instant. Then, without any warning, Shimeng suddenly appeared behind Xiao Chen and threw out a punch. Seeing this, Xiao Chen dodged sideways and narrowly avoided Shimeng's attack. So fast! Xiao Chen was secretly shocked. He didn't expect Shimeng to be so fast. Judging from his appearance, Shimeng was obviously a strength-type warrior. He was tall and muscular. Such a person was definitely powerful, but at the same time, it was inevitable that his movements would be somewhat clumsy. However, Shimeng was different. With his tall, muscular figure and powerful strength, his speed was absolutely fast. It could even be said that he was ridiculously fast. Shimeng didn't mind that his attack missed. He moved his feet and his figure shrunk again. Then, he appeared on Xiao Chen's left side and threw out another punch. This time, Xiao Chen had no space to dodge, so he could only thrust his sword forward to meet Shi Meng's attack head-on. Both of them clashed head-on and were forced to retreat a few steps. Looking at this, Xiao Chen's eyes glinted. This Shi Meng was indeed difficult to deal with. Not only was his strength terrifying, but he could also cultivate his speed to such a high level. Compared to Xiao Chen, Shi Meng's battle intent was monstrous. He was very strong. In Shi Meng's opinion, Xiao Chen was very strong. However, it was precisely because of this that Shi Meng was excited. It was already delightful to be able to fight with such a person. Therefore, looking at Xiao Chen, Shi Meng laughed heartily. "Ha again." Having said that, Shi Meng moved his feet and attacked again. Seeing this, Xiao Chen didn't continue to defend passively this time. He performed the mysterious heavenly steps and also moved forward to fight with Shi Meng. It was impossible to see their figures clearly. Both of them were extremely fast. Only two afterimages could be seen colliding in the air. Along with their collisions, a series of sonic booms sounded and layers of ripples appeared in the air. The mysterious heavenly steps was a set of body movement martial skills that Wine Taoist had taught Xiao Chen. It was at the upper sacred level and was extremely fast. Moreover, after 5 years of practice, Xiao Chen had already cultivated it to the perfection level, just like the green lotus sword Qi. However, at this time, facing Shi Meng, even though Xiao Chen had performed the perfection level mysterious heavenly steps, he could only keep up with Shi Meng's speed. He didn't have the slightest advantage. Logically speaking, Shi Meng was from the barbarian tribe, so his speed shouldn't be very fast. After all, everyone knew that the barbarian tribe was known for their strength. In terms of bloodline, the barbarian tribe's speed was inferior to the other tribes. However, Shi Meng made up for this shortcoming of his. Not only did he have the terrifying physical strength of the barbarian tribe, but he also had a speed that was not inferior to Xiao Chen's. It could be said that Shi Meng was a perfect existence. Strength was the barbarian tribe's strongest point, and speed was their weakest point. He had completely made up for his weakness as a barbarian tribe member. Shi Meng had no other shortcomings. It was hard to imagine how Shi Meng managed to cultivate to such a high speed. After all, as a member of the barbarian race, the amount of effort Shi Meng had to put in to achieve such a speed was probably much more than the prodigies of the other races. After a fierce battle, Xiao Chen and Shi Meng didn't hold back at all. However, until now, the two of them were still evenly matched. Neither of them had the upper hand. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1557. Their battle strength could be said to be evenly matched, and so was their cultivation. Shi Meng's cultivation had also reached the limit of the advanced quasi-sage realm, and he was only one step away from the advanced quasi-sage realm. Their voices crisscrossed, and a series of sonic booms were heard. However, what was surprising was that the space where the two of them were fighting did not collapse. Not only was this the case for Xiao Chen and Shi Meng, but it was also the case for the others. The space in the northern underworld immortal realm was much harder than the outside world. It was completely capable of withstanding the aftermath of a battle below the immortal realm. Therefore, although the battle was extremely intense, there were only some ripples in the space, and it did not collapse. At this time, Xiao Chen and Shi Meng were already locked in a fierce battle. They only had each other in their eyes, and would not pay attention to anything else. Both sides were locked in a fierce battle. Not only were Xiao Chen and Shi Meng locked in a fierce battle, the others such as the Divine Lord, Tian Mushi, Long Yang, and the others were also locked in a fierce battle with their respective opponents. The only person who did not make a move was Yu Shujin. Watching the battle coldly, Yu Shujin's expression did not change from the beginning to the end. She still had an indifferent look on her face. Perhaps in Yu Shujin's eyes, no one in the fierce battle could be her opponent. Although the Divine Lord and the others were quite strong, there was still a gap between them and Yu Shujin. Yu Shujin seemed to be watching the development of the battle out of boredom. In the end, her gaze fell on Xiao Chen, who was fighting with Shi Meng. In fact, Yu Shujin had already noticed Xiao Chen from the beginning. After all, Xiao Chen's opponent was Shi Meng. Among all the younger generation in the seventh realm, Shi Meng's combat strength was second only to Yu Shujin. Therefore, when she saw Xiao Chen and Shi Meng fighting, Yu Shujin's first reaction was that Xiao Chen would definitely lose. Yu Shujin was certain that Xiao Chen was no match for Shi Meng. However, at this moment, Xiao Chen was actually able to fight Shi Meng to a standstill. This was somewhat out of Yu Shujin's expectations. Therefore, Yu Shujin subconsciously took a few more glances at Xiao Chen. There wasn't much emotion in Yu Shujin's eyes. In Yu Shujin's eyes, it was indeed not bad that Xiao Chen was able to fight evenly with Shi Meng. Unfortunately, this bit of strength wasn't enough for Yu Shujin. At the very least, Xiao Chen's cultivation hadn't reached the perfection of the quasi-saint realm. If Xiao Chen's cultivation fell behind, he wouldn't be a match for Yu Shujin. Yu Shujin was like a spectator, coldly watching the development of the situation. As time went by, casualties began to appear in the battle between the two sides. Many of the supreme talents were either severely injured, unable to continue fighting, or killed directly. There were casualties on both sides. One after another, the supreme talents lost their lives in the fierce battle. However, no one chose to stop. After all, such an outcome was already expected. Both sides couldn't possibly back down in the slightest when it came to the immortal crystal spirit vein. Unless there was a clear victor, there was no possibility of stopping at all. The supreme talents fell one after another. At the same time, the outcome of the battle between the Divine Lord and the other First Holy Sons was also gradually decided. The first one to defeat his opponent was the First Holy Son of the First Mainland. He was rather lucky as his opponent wasn't strong. Therefore, after a fierce battle, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland successfully killed his opponent. After killing his opponent, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland immediately set his sights on Yu Shujin. Upon seeing that Yu Shujin remained indifferent and didn't make a move, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland sneered. "Stop putting on an act. Go to hell." With a cold snort, he chose to attack without any hesitation. He remembered that the heavenly spiritual vein would belong to whoever killed Yu Shujin. The First Holy Son of the First Mainland immediately attacked Yu Shujin. Upon seeing this, a look of disdain flashed across Yu Shujin's eyes. "You weren't my match even when you were at your peak, let alone now. Even if you want to die, you don't have to be in such a hurry." As soon as she finished speaking, Yu Shujin gently slapped out with her palm. Instantly, a terrifying aura continuously condensed and a huge blue palm print instantly fell from the sky. The huge palm print fell fiercely. Upon seeing this, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland's expression changed abruptly. Strong. Only in the face of Yu Shujin's attack did he realize how powerful she was. She was simply on a completely different level from the supreme talent that he had just killed. As the heir of the seventh realm, Yu Shujin naturally lived up to her reputation. Just like what he had said, even the First Holy Son of the First Mainland at his peak was no match for her. Moreover, he had just experienced an intense battle. At this moment, it was even more impossible for him to be Yu Shujin's match. When the palm fell, there was no space for him to dodge at all. Immediately after, the First Holy Son of the First Mainland could only brace himself to receive the palm. However, he didn't expect that in the face of this palm, he didn't have much ability to resist at all. In the end, he was killed in a single blow. After instantly killing the First Holy Son of the First Mainland with a single palm, the First Holy Son of the Fifth Mainland, Song Yun, suddenly appeared behind Yu Shujin. Song Yun had also killed his opponent. At this moment, he suddenly attacked while Yu Shujin was dealing with the First Holy Son of the First Mainland. Although his method was somewhat dishonorable, This was a battlefield, so who would care so much about it? He had been waiting for this opportunity, and now he finally seized it. Appearing behind Yu Shujin, Song Yun had a cold smile on his face. Yu Shujin, die. With that, Song Yun directly clenched his fist into a claw. Then, he clawed out. Spiritual chi madly gathered, quickly converging into a black claw that viciously swiped at Yu Shujin. This claw was Song Yun's killing move. It was extremely powerful. Moreover, Yu Shujin's own comprehension of the law of corrosion also surged out at this moment. As long as she was hit, even if it was only a slight flesh wound, the wound would quickly corrode and become fatal. It seemed like he had succeeded. Song Yun's face was filled with unconcealable excitement. However, at this moment, Yu Shujin, who was still indifferent, softly opened her mouth and said, "Seal." Then, an indescribable law power gathered around Yu Shujin. Song Yun's claw was unable to hit Yu Shujin. It was directly blocked by this layer of law power. It was impossible to break through this layer of law power. Song Yun's sneak attack, his killing move, couldn't hurt Yu Shujin at all. Song Yun exclaimed in disbelief. How is this possible? Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 1558. His all-out attack didn't even touch the corner of Yu Shujin's clothes. Facing this outcome, Song Yun couldn't believe his eyes. Besides, he had never seen the power of laws that blocked his attack. It could be said that Yu Shujin blocked Song Yun's sneak attack perfectly. She turned around unhurriedly with an indifferent expression and said softly, "Only an ant would do something as despicable as a sneak attack. But an ant will always be an ant. So what if it's a sneak attack?" Perhaps Song Yun's sneak attack was nothing more than a joke to Yu Shujin because she was confident that Song Yun couldn't possibly hurt her. Before Song Yun could react, Yu Shujin gently pointed her finger at him. Then, a mysterious power of law surrounded Song Yun. Song Yun was horrified to be surrounded by Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws. He tried to defend himself with his spiritual energy, but it was a pity that the effects were minimal. He couldn't stop Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws at all. Song Yun shrieked in horror. "What's that? What's that? Get lost! Get lost!" All defenses were useless against Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws. Along with Song Yun's shrieks, Yu Shujin's expression changed. Then, Song Yun's voice came to an abrupt halt. Shortly after, he became sluggish as though he had turned into a fool. "You've gone mad. I'll let you be a fool for the rest of your life. This is the best outcome for you. At least you're still alive," Yu Shujin said flatly to Song Yun, who was in a daze and had saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. Sealed Song Yun's consciousness? This was simply unheard of. How could one's consciousness be sealed? No one knew what method Yu Shujin used to do it. But judging from Song Yun's current state, he was indeed no different from a fool. He couldn't even speak and could only make sounds when he opened his mouth. This method was simply too strange. However, at this moment the rest of the First Holy Son, Divine Lord, and the others had also finished off their opponent. Following which, a few of them came to Yu Shujin's side and looked at Song Yun, who had already lost his consciousness. Their faces were incomparably solemn. Facing Sir God and the others alone, Yu Shujin did not look nervous at all. On the contrary, she smiled calmly and said, "It seems that there are quite a lot of people who are eager to die." Sir God and the others had defeated their opponent. Yu Shujin was not surprised and did not show any signs of anger. Faced with such a calm Yu Shujin, Sir God and the others looked at each other. Then, without hesitation, they attacked Yu Shujin together. Based on the strength that Yu Shujin had just displayed, it was impossible for them to stand a chance in a one-on-one battle. Therefore, they did not hesitate to join forces to attack Yu Shujin. Sir God, Long Yang, Tian Mushi, and the 3 first holy sons of the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th mainlands attacked Yu Shujin at the same time from different directions. Of the first holy sons of the 7 mainlands, 2 had already died. 1 had lost his ability to fight. The first holy son of the 4th mainland had been killed by a prodigy from the 7th realm. He was not as strong as that prodigy, so he had been killed. However, this did not matter. The most important thing now was still Yu Shujin. As long as they could defeat Yu Shujin, they would win this battle. This was because Yu Shujin was the heir of the 7th realm. She was the symbol and idol of all the young prodigies of the 7th realm. If she was defeated, the other prodigies of the 7th realm would collapse. They did not care about fairness. Or rather, at a time like this, who would care about fairness? Therefore, Sir God and the others attacked together, intending to kill Yu Shujin. Yu Shujin smiled faintly in the face of the 6 people's attack. Sir God and the others were all heavily injured. After all, they had killed their respective opponents. Naturally, they were not unscathed. As a result, their strength and aura were not at their peak. It was naturally much easier for Yu Shujin to deal with them. With a thought, a long sword appeared in Yu Shujin's hand. Yu Shujin was also a sword cultivator. She took a step forward and instantly arrived before the first holy son of the 2nd mainland. She said softly, "Seal." Then, the mysterious power of laws appeared again. There was no way to stop it. It quickly enveloped the first holy son of the 2nd mainland. Enveloped by the mysterious power of laws, the first holy son of the 2nd mainland suddenly felt as if his limbs had disappeared into thin air. That's right. There was no pain at all. There were no wounds. However, his limbs seemed to have disappeared. They were clearly still there, but he could not move his limbs. He could not even move a finger. Strange, it was really too strange. He had inexplicably lost the connection with his limbs. Without his limbs, he was naturally unable to fight. Yu Shujin said indifferently, "You have no power to fight back now. For example, even if my sword slowly pierces your heart like this, all you can do is watch. There's nothing you can do." As she said that, Yu Shujin's sword slowly pierced the first holy son of the 2nd mainland's heart. He could only watch as the sword pierced through his defenses and through his skin. In the end, it pierced through his heart. He was completely powerless. He could not even move a finger. The first holy son of the 2nd mainland's eyes were filled with confusion and fear. Why was this happening? What sorcery had Yu Shujin used? He had no idea what Yu Shujin had done at all. However, it was too late to say anything now. Yu Shujin's sword had already pierced his heart. At the same time, the violent sword intent instantly destroyed all the life in his body. A chill immediately assaulted his body. At the same time, his consciousness gradually blurred. In the end, the first holy son of the 2nd mainland plummeted to the ground, dead on the spot. She had killed a person in a single exchange. The divine lords and the others had not expected this outcome at all. However, now that things had come to this, there was no way out for them. Therefore, after the first holy son of the 2nd continent died, the remaining 5 divine lords didn't stop. Instead, they all unleashed their own attack. 5 attacks came at Yu Shujin from different directions. Yu Shujin had no intention of dodging their attacks. "Just like before," she said softly, "Seal." Then, the mysterious power of laws formed a protective barrier around Yu Shujin, successfully blocking the attacks of the 5 monarchs. "Begging for your collection, begging for your monthly votes, begging for your recommendation." Chapter 1559. It was the same method, but this time, it blocked the attacks of the 5 Sir Gods. Seeing that the 5 attacks were blocked, the faces of the 5 Sir Gods turned solemn. What kind of technique was this? First, he had mysteriously sealed Song Yun's intelligence, turning him into an idiot. Then, he had mysteriously sealed the limbs of the 2nd continent's number 1 holy son before killing him. Now, he had blocked the combined attacks of the Divine Lord and the others. The power of law. What kind of power of law did Yu Shujin comprehend? After perfectly blocking everyone's attacks, Yu Shujin said indifferently, "Could it be that the so-called prodigies of the seventh wilderness only have this kind of strength? If that's the case, then it's a little disappointing." Yu Shujin defeated the Sir God's group of 6 single-handedly. At the same time, the battle between Xiao Chun and Shi Meng had also reached its most intense stage. It would not be long before the outcome of the battle was decided. After fighting fiercely for several hours, Xiao Chun and Shi Meng both suffered serious injuries. Xiao Chun had the rapid self-healing ability of the tempered battle body, but Shi Meng's physical strength was also very strong. Although he did not have the rapid self-healing ability of Xiao Chun, the impact of ordinary injuries on Shi Meng was negligible. The two of them were evenly matched, and Xiao Chun's self-healing ability had already been exhausted. It was time to decide the outcome of the battle. Xiao Chun slashed out with his sword and Shi Meng punched out with his fist. After another head-on collision, both of them were pushed back and spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. Looking at Xiao Chun, the expression in Shi Meng's eyes actually calmed down at this moment. His tone was also extremely calm as he said, "Xiao Chun, let's decide the outcome of the battle." Shi Meng had already acknowledged Xiao Chun's strength. Hearing that, Xiao Chun nodded and said, "Yes, it's time to decide the outcome of the battle." After saying that, the power of the sword domain in Xiao Chun's body suddenly erupted. His great sage realm cultivation base was also raised to the extreme at this moment. At this point in the battle, Xiao Chun finally decided to use his trump card. As Xiao Chun's aura increased, a giant finger formed by spiritual qi and the power of the sword domain slowly appeared behind him. It was a huge finger, and it was extremely solid. Even the fingerprints could be seen clearly. Along with the appearance of this huge finger, the spiritual energy between heaven and earth frantically gathered towards the tip of this huge finger. The 9th finger of the 9th heaven sword finger, which was also the last finger, was performed by Xianyuan sword finger. This was the first time that Xiao Chun had performed Xianyuan sword finger in public. It was the essence of the 9th heaven sword finger, and it was also the finger with the greatest might. Moreover, the 9th heaven sword finger had been improved by the Wine Taoist over the past 5 years, so it was much stronger than before. Even the Wine Taoist sighed with emotion. The 9th heaven sword finger was probably the most powerful upper sage grade martial technique, below the immortal technique. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth frantically gathered. Facing the Xianyuan sword finger, Shi Meng's face also showed a grave expression for the first time. At the same time, Xiao Chun said faintly, "I originally planned to use this move to deal with Yu Shujin, but now it seems that it will be very difficult to defeat you if I don't use this move." Xiao Chun had specially left the Xianyuan sword finger for Yu Shujin, but unfortunately, he was forced to use it in advance. However, there was no other way, because if he couldn't even defeat Shi Meng, how could he defeat Yu Shujin? As soon as he finished speaking, a thick sword light flashed from the huge finger and rapidly rushed towards Shi Meng. The power of this attack was absolutely terrifying. An ordinary quasi-saint supreme sovereign would probably die upon contact with it. With a grave expression, Shi Meng didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. He let out a furious roar, and rays of yellow light continuously gathered around his body. He went all out. Then, the Xianyuan sword finger ruthlessly bombarded Shi Meng's body. Shi Meng also used his body to block the Xianyuan sword finger in the most simple and violent way. Shi Meng roared angrily as he hugged the thick sword light tightly with both hands. His aura had been raised to the extreme by him. Shi Meng hugged the Xianyuan sword finger tightly with both hands. Although he managed to block the Xianyuan sword finger, it was only temporary. Soon, Shi Meng's skin began to bleed. The terrifying power of the Xianyuan sword finger was gradually tearing Shi Meng's skin apart. Wounds quickly appeared. In just a few breaths, Shi Meng had become a bloody man. His entire body was dyed red with blood, looking extremely terrifying. His body seemed to be torn apart by the countless sword qi contained in the Xianyuan sword finger. Even so, Shi Meng still had no intention of retreating. The light around his body became denser and denser, and his aura also rose to the extreme. Under Shi Meng's frenzy, there was even a moment when the Xianyuan sword finger's sword light seemed to be deflected by him. Unfortunately, although Shi Meng had already calmed down and used his full strength, he was still swallowed by the Xianyuan sword finger in the end. He was ruthlessly struck to the ground by the Xianyuan sword finger. With a loud bang, a huge pit was formed on the ground. Shi Meng also fell unconscious, lying in the middle of the deep pit with blood all over his body. After taking the Xianyuan sword finger head-on, Shi Meng was only seriously injured and unconscious. He didn't die. At the same time, Xiao Chen no longer cared about Shi Meng's life and death. Instead, he moved his feet and directly rushed towards Yu Shujin. The 5 divine monarchs besieged Yu Shujin, but it wasn't enough. They were swept away by Yu Shujin. In a short period of time, Yu Shujin had already killed 2 of them. The first chosen of the 2nd and 3rd mainland were also killed by Yu Shujin. Even the remaining 4 divine monarchs were in an extremely dangerous situation. At this moment, Yu Shujin slashed out with her sword. The tip of the sword fiercely rushed towards Long Yang. His legs had been sealed by Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws, so there was no way for him to dodge. Seeing the tip of the sword coming towards him, Long Yang's eyes flashed with determination. He planned to take the attack head-on. However, just as Long Yang was about to attack, Xiao Chun suddenly appeared in front of him. He also slashed out with his Cyan Lotus sword qi. Then, the 2 swords collided violently. However, Xiao Chen's Cyan Lotus sword qi was obviously not Yu Shujin's opponent. Therefore, Xiao Chun had to use 3 Cyan Lotus sword qi in a row to block Yu Shujin's attack. He successfully blocked Yu Shujin's attack and saved Long Yang. At this moment, Yu Shujin didn't attack again. She glanced at Shi Meng, who was lying in the deep pit, covered in blood and unconscious. Then, she looked at Xiao Chen and said with a faint smile in her eyes, "Not bad. Even Shi Meng is not your opponent. Looks like you should be the strongest person among the younger generation in the 7th wilderness. Please add me to your collection, monthly vote, recommend me." Chapter 1560. Xiao Chen had defeated Shi Meng, and Yu Shujin couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. In her opinion, Xiao Chen should be the first saint of the 7th wilderness because in terms of strength, the Divine Lord and the others were indeed inferior to Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen's expression was calm when he heard Yu Shujin's words, but he didn't feel relaxed in his heart. The 6 of them had besieged Yu Shujin, but she had swept them all away. 2 of them had been killed, and the remaining 4 were also severely injured. He had to admit that Yu Shujin was indeed extremely powerful. Xiao Chen knew that his chances of winning against her were not high. Of course, it would be different if Xiao Chen's cultivation broke through to the lesser perfection of the quasi-sage realm. Xiao Chen could still fight with Yu Shujin if their cultivations were similar. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. Xiao Chen's current cultivation was at the greater perfection of the quasi-sage realm, and he was only 1 step away from the lesser perfection. However, it was this 1 step that caused the gap between his cultivation and Yu Shujin's. Although he knew that he was no match for her, there was no way out now. Xiao Chen didn't think that Yu Shujin would stop if he and the others surrendered. He looked at Yu Shujin calmly. Yu Shujin smiled and said, "I'll give you time to recover, and then you and I will fight again." Yu Shujin didn't make a move. Instead, she gave Xiao Chen time to recover. Perhaps in Yu Shujin's opinion, victory would definitely belong to her, so she didn't take Xiao Chen seriously at all. That was why she was so generous to give Xiao Chen time to recover. Xiao Chen was stunned when he heard Yu Shujin's words. Yu Shujin smiled faintly and said, "I'm actually not interested in you guys. You're not bad, so I can give you a chance to fight with me. Of course, if you guys are willing to retreat now, I can also spare your lives. The choice is up to you. Xiao Qin was wrong. Yu Shujin didn't have the intention to kill them. The reason why she had killed them previously was because the prodigies of the Seventh Wilderness had taken the initiative to attack. Of course, not wanting to kill them all didn't mean Yu Shujin had a good impression of the Seventh Baron's Heaven's favorites. This was her personality. To put it bluntly, in Yu Shujin's heart, there was only one goal in coming to the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm, and that was the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein. If anyone tried to stop her from obtaining the Immortal Crystal Spiritual Vein, she would kill them. On the other hand, if no one tried to stop her, Yu Shujin would not bother to make a move. It was such a simple thought. Xiao Chen was slightly stunned. Then, he smiled bitterly. From Yu Shujin's words, Xiao Chen could tell that Yu Shujin was a very self-centered person. He didn't care about what the outside world thought. In any case, Yu Shujin would only consider whether she was comfortable or happy. If she was happy, Yu Shujin would let her off even if she was an enemy. On the other hand, if she was unhappy, then even if she was her companion, Yu Shujin would probably kill her. Xiao Chen thought to himself, "This is a man who is egotistical to the extreme." Then, Xiao Chen nodded slightly and said, "All right, let's fight to determine the winner. If I lose, I'll give you the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen looked at the Seventh Baron's Heaven's favorites who were still fighting fiercely and shouted, "Everyone, stop fighting." Since they had already decided to fight to determine the winner of the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein, there was no point in continuing to fight. Moreover, judging from the situation, if they insisted on fighting to the death, they would probably suffer great losses in the end. Xiao Chen didn't want to see such an outcome. After all, Qin Shuru and the other two women, as well as Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling, were also on the battlefield. Xiao Chen didn't want anything to happen to them. Moreover, their purpose in coming to the Northern Underworld Immortal Realm was to stop Yu Shujin from obtaining the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein, not to fight to the death with the younger generation of the Seventh Realm. Therefore, there was no point in continuing to fight. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, everyone stopped fighting. At the same time, Yu Shujin said calmly, "Let's stop fighting." Upon hearing this, the young geniuses from the Seventh Realm immediately stopped what they were doing. The Sky Prides from both sides had stopped fighting. However, after the intense battle, both sides had suffered quite a number of casualties. Originally, each side had about 500 people. Now, about 100 of them had died, and the rest were all injured. After the two sides stopped fighting, Xiao Chen sat down cross-legged and began to recover from his injuries. Facing Yu Shujin, Xiao Chen's chances of winning were not high. However, this battle had to be fought. Otherwise, the Immortal Crystal Spirit Vein would be given away to someone else. Moreover, among the Seventh Baron's talents, the only one who still had a chance to fight against Yu Shujin was Xiao Chen. After all, the Divine Lord and the other 5 had besieged Yu Shujin, but Yu Shujin had defeated them all. Therefore, the Divine Lord and the others would definitely lose if they fought. Only Xiao Chen had a chance to fight against Yu Shujin. While Xiao Chen was recovering, a young Seventh Realm's talent came to Yu Shujin's side. Because he had just gone through a great battle, the young Seventh Realm's talent was still full of blood qi. He looked at Yu Shujin with dissatisfaction. "Heir, why did you stop fighting? With the strength of an heir, he can definitely kill the Seventh Wilderness Holy Sun here." The young Seventh Realm's talent was very dissatisfied with Yu Shujin's actions. She could have killed everyone in the Seventh Baron. Why did she suddenly stop? However, Yu Shujin only said calmly in the face of his doubts, "Are you questioning my decision?" There was no anger in her tone, but the young Seventh Realm's talent's expression still changed when he heard that. Then, he cupped his hands and bowed to Yu Shujin in horror. "Please forgive me, heir apparent. Just now I was just..." He didn't think much of it before, but after hearing Yu Shujin's words, he realized that Yu Shujin wasn't a kind person. He wanted to explain, but unfortunately, Yu Shujin didn't give him the chance. Before he could finish, Yu Shujin interrupted him. Go back to the punishment hall to receive your punishment. No one could question Yu Shujin's decision. Although Yu Shujin gave Shao Chen time to recover and wanted to have a fair fight with him, the young Seventh Realm's talents couldn't understand why. Even so, they couldn't question Yu Shujin. Those who were familiar with Yu Shujin knew that many times, Yu Shujin's decisions were unpredictable and difficult to accept. It could be said that Yu Shujin acted based on her own preferences. As for the result, it wasn't within Yu Shujin's consideration. Hearing Yu Shujin's words, the young Seventh Realm's talent who had questioned Yu Shujin nodded respectfully. Yes, thank you for your mercy, heir apparent. Ignoring him, Yu Shujin looked at Shao Chen and murmured softly, the Seventh Baron's first saint. Let me see what the young Seventh Baron's talent is capable of. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1561. He really let Shao Chen heal himself. Yu Shujin had no intention of attacking him. The young geniuses from the Seventh Realm didn't understand Yu Shujin's willful decision, but they didn't dare to say anything. After all, Yu Shujin was the heir of Kunlun's field. His words were orders to these young talents. Moreover, many of them were familiar with Yu Shujin. They knew that this was his personality. It was useless to say anything. Since Yu Shujin wanted to fight Shao Chen so much, let him be. It wasn't the first time that Yu Shujin had done this kind of nonsense. Yu Shujin patiently waited for Shao Chen to heal himself. He wasn't interested in a seriously injured Shao Chen. He wanted to fight Shao Chen in his best condition. Several hours passed. With the help of pills, Shao Chen's injuries recovered quickly. Shao Chen slowly opened his eyes and looked at Yu Shujin with a complicated expression. Yu Shujin was truly a strange person. Both of them were from different camps. Originally, they should have fought to the death. However, Yu Shujin was so willful and reckless. She would do whatever she wanted to do, regardless of the consequences. Shao Chen stood up and looked at Yu Shujin. Come on. I've been waiting for you for a long time, Yu Shujin replied softly. Then, the two of them flew up into the air one after another. As for the others, they didn't intend to fight at all. They just stared at the two of them. They stood in the air and looked at each other. Shao Chen didn't feel any killing intent or hostility from Yu Shujin's eyes. There was only a strong desire to fight. This was strange. They were enemies, but Yu Shujin only revealed his desire to fight. This meant that Yu Shujin really just wanted to fight Shao Chen. He didn't have any other intentions. Like Hua Wushuang, Yu Shujin was a battle maniac. Of course, there was a difference between Yu Shujin and Hua Wushuang. Yu Shujin would only be interested in people she was interested in. Like Sir God and the others, Yu Shujin was not interested in them. Hence, she had no intention of fighting with them. In Yu Shujin's opinion, as long as he could defeat Shao Chen, it would be equivalent to defeating all the young geniuses in the Seventh Wilderness. Therefore, he only needed to fight with Shao Chen. There was no need for him to fight with the others. Yu Shujin looked at Shao Chen indifferently and said, "Your physical body is good. You're recovering fast." Hearing this, Shao Chen replied faintly, "Come on. Let's fight." With that, Shao Chen used his mind and the Wuchen sword instantly appeared in his hand. With the Wuchen sword in his hand, Shao Chen's aura instantly became fierce. The corners of Yu Shujin's mouth curled into a smile when she sensed Shao Chen's fierce aura. She then drew her sword as well. At the same time, a fierce sword will that was no weaker than Shao Chen's sword into the sky. Both of them were from the human clan and sword cultivators. They stood with their swords and two different sword essences kept colliding. At the same time, Shao Chen and Yu Shujin both released their sword realms. The two sword realms instantly overlapped and enveloped the two of them. Their sword realms had reached the small perfection realm. With the appearance of the sword realms, the place where the two of them were fighting seemed to be confined. Countless sword chi whistled and it made people's hair stand on end. It could be said that Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin's sword principle cultivation had already reached the peak. Even if they were compared with the sword cultivators of the older generation, their sword principle would not be weaker. The two of them could already be considered the top sword cultivators. They were about to engage in a fierce battle. The fierce sword essence seemed to be tearing the sky apart. The sword chi whistled and they looked at each other for a while. In the end, Xiao Chen took the initiative to attack. He slashed out with his sword and instantly released the green lotus sword chi. A cyan sword streaked across the sky. When Yu Shujin saw that, she remained expressionless. She also attacked with her sword. She was also using a high-grade holy tier martial skill. A dark red sword chi shot out and collided with the cyan lotus sword chi. The two sword chi collided violently. Yu Shujin's sword chi obviously had the upper hand. This didn't mean that Xiao Chen's sword principle cultivation was inferior to Yu Shujin's. It was completely because his realm couldn't keep up. Xiao Chen was now in the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, while Yu Shujin was already in the minor perfection of the quasi-sage realm. She was one minor realm higher than Xiao Chen. Therefore, Yu Shujin obviously had the upper hand in a head-on collision. Yu Shujin could suppress Xiao Chen because of her higher cultivation. This was something that couldn't be helped. Xiao Chen had already expected such a situation. Therefore, he didn't hesitate. Xiao Chen slashed out a second time to break Yu Shujin's sword edge. Yu Shujin slashed out once while Xiao Chen had to use two swords to resist. This was the suppression that came from the cultivation realm. As expected, Xiao Chen was at a disadvantage after the attack. However, at this moment, Yu Shujin made another unexpected decision. Yu Shujin said faintly, "Let's do this. I forgot that you are in the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm." With that, Yu Shujin actually took the initiative to suppress her cultivation to the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, the same as Xiao Chen. She actually took the initiative to suppress her cultivation in order to have a fair battle with Xiao Chen. Looking at Yu Shujin in the sky, the young geniuses of the seventh realm sighed helplessly. Here it comes again. This fellow's willful temper is here again. Many of the young geniuses of the seventh realm weren't surprised that Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation. Instead, they only revealed deep helplessness. She started to act willfully again. But what could they do? She was in air. No one could control her. Looking helplessly at Yu Shujin, who had suppressed her cultivation to the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm, many geniuses of the seventh realm sighed helplessly. It was also very tiring to follow such an heir. Yu Shujin was so willful every time. Xiao Chen was also stunned by Yu Shujin's behavior. It was the first time he had met someone like that. Yu Shujin had indeed been mischievous before, and she had done it according to her own whims. However, since Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation, what could Xiao Chen do? Without thinking much, Xiao Chen moved his feet and took the initiative to attack. Using the mysterious sky steps, Xiao Chen instantly appeared on Yu Shujin's left side and stabbed out with his sword. Facing Xiao Chen's attack, Yu Shujin gently raised the sword in her hand and exquisitely blocked Xiao Chen's attack. At the same time, her body tilted slightly. The sword in her hand suddenly changed direction and slashed directly at Xiao Chen. She had switched from defense to offense. Seeing this, Xiao Chen could only choose to withdraw and retreat. It could be said that she had perfectly blocked Xiao Chen's attack without using any other abilities. She had only blocked it with her sword principle. From this, it was enough to see that Yu Shujin's sword principle cultivation was absolutely not weaker than Xiao Chen's. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1562. Yu Shujin blocked Xiao Chen's attack perfectly and then counterattacked with an exquisite sword move. She displayed her superb sword cultivation as soon as she made her move. However, Xiao Chen didn't panic at all. After retreating, he gently pointed his finger and instantly performed the 8th finger of the 9th heaven sword finger, the red heaven sword finger. A fiery red sword ray flashed and instantly shot toward Yu Shujin. In the face of Xiao Chen's attack, Yu Shujin slashed down with her sword. The two sword rays collided fiercely again. After taking the initiative to suppress her cultivation, Yu Shujin's cultivation realm was obviously non-existent. Therefore, Xiao Chen didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in this head-on collision. The two sides fought fiercely. Although this was only the beginning, the strength displayed by both Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin was enough to shock the others present. I didn't expect Xiao Chen's strength to have improved to such a level. Tian Mushi and the others sighed as they watched the battle in the sky. They still remembered that 5 years ago, Xiao Chen's strength was only on par with the three of them. But now, after 5 years, Xiao Chen had obviously surpassed them in strength. This naturally made Tian Mushi and the others sigh. However, Qin Shuru and the other 3 girls didn't have such thoughts at this time. They all looked at the battle in the sky with worried expressions. Although they had confidence in Xiao Chen, Yu Shujin, as the heir of the 7th realm, wasn't someone to be trifled with. The battle between the two of them was extremely dangerous. The slightest carelessness could be fatal. All kinds of martial arts techniques bloomed in the sky. Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin gradually revealed their true abilities. However, in terms of sword cultivation, there wasn't much of a gap between the two of them. Whether it was Xiao Chen or Yu Shujin, their understanding of sword cultivation could be considered top-notch. Looking at the battle between the two of them, it was probably impossible for them to determine the winner with just sword cultivation. After a series of several hundred moves, the two of them were evenly matched, and it was difficult to determine the victor. Regarding this, the battle intent in Yu Shujin's eyes grew increasingly intense. Not bad, Xiao Chen was indeed a good opponent, which made Yu Shujin very satisfied. Especially Xiao Chen's sword. It could be said that he was the strongest among the younger generation that Yu Shujin had ever seen. He was not any weaker than himself. Overflowing with fighting spirit, Yu Shujin's attacks became increasingly ferocious. In response to this, Xiao Chen did not shrink back at all. Similarly, he did not show any signs of weakness as he met her attacks head-on. Movement technique, sword Dao, martial technique, sword domain. The two of them could be said to have gone all out at this moment. The terrifying aftershock of the battle almost swept through the entire horizon. Such an intense battle shocked the crowd below. Up until now, Yu Shujin knew that it was already impossible to defeat Xiao Chen with just Xiao Chen's cultivation in the way of the sword. After all, Yu Shujin's cultivation in the way of the sword was not any weaker than his own. Yu Shujin had already witnessed Xiao Chen's terrifying cultivation in the way of the sword. An inexplicable power of laws erupted from Yu Shujin as he looked at Xiao Chen calmly. "You're not bad. At the very least, your cultivation in the way of the sword is one of the strongest I've ever seen." It was rare for Yu Shujin to praise Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen did not care about the praise at all. At this moment, Xiao Chen's attention was completely focused on the mysterious law that Yu Shujin had unleashed. It was a law that Xiao Chen had never seen before. At the same time as Yu Shujin unleashed the mysterious law, the expressions of Tian Mushi and the others changed. They had all witnessed how Yu Shujin used the mysterious law to kill the previous few people. It was a very mysterious and powerful power of laws. While the few of them were secretly worried for Xiao Chen, Yu Shujin yelled softly, "Seal!" Then, the mysterious power of laws struck Xiao Chen directly. In the face of the attack of the power of laws, spiritual energy defense was obviously useless. Furthermore, Xiao Chen also immediately felt that his hands seemed to be bound by something. He gradually lost all feeling in his hands, as if they no longer existed. This is... Xiao Chen was slightly taken aback. His hands were not listening to him at all, as though they did not exist at all. His hands hung limply by his side, and he couldn't even move a finger. Looking at this scene, Xiao Chen was shocked. What kind of power of laws is this? It's actually capable of doing this. Looking at Xiao Chen's limp hands, Yu Shujin said flatly. I've sealed your hands. Xiao Chen, what do you think the outcome will be for a sword cultivator without his hands? Sealed? My hands were sealed? Upon hearing Yu Shujin's words, Xiao Chen was taken aback. Seeing this, Yu Shujin had no intention of hiding anything and said plainly. The law that I comprehended is the sealing law. It can seal everything in this world, just like this. As she spoke, Yu Shujin extended her right hand slightly. Sealing law gathered on her right hand. Immediately, the space above her palm distorted slightly. Then, it was as if it had been frozen. It could even seal space. Not only that, but the sealing law could also seal everything in this world, including spiritual energy, air, water, fire, and so on. Xiao Chen's hands were sealed by Yu Shujin, and he couldn't move at all. The sealing law. He didn't expect Yu Shujin to have comprehended the sealing law. The sealing law was also a level 3 law. It was very powerful and extremely strange. Xiao Chen couldn't feel his hands at all. A strange glint flashed in his eyes as he looked at Yu Shujin. She was obviously more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Xiao Chen's hands hung limply by his side. Qin Shuru and the other 7th Wilderness geniuses below were also shocked, especially Tian Mushi, the Divine Lord, and the others who had fought with Yu Shujin just now. At that moment, looking at Xiao Chen in the sky, Long Yang said with a grave expression. Not good. Their memories of Yu Shujin's mysterious power of laws were still fresh in their minds. Moreover, they were extremely fearful of it. Earlier, Yu Shujin had relied on the mysterious power of laws to sweep through the 6 of them so easily. Judging from Xiao Chen's appearance, it seemed that he had also been hit. His hands hung limply by his side, and it was obvious that he couldn't move at all. With a grave expression, the Divine Lord said in a deep voice. This is going to be troublesome. Everyone broke out in cold sweat for Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen suddenly revealed a faint smile and said, The sealing law. I see. But do you really think that it can seal everything? Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1563. Xiao Chen's hands were sealed by Yu Shujin, but there wasn't the slightest panic or fear on his face. On the contrary, he was extremely calm. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Yu Shujin was also curious. But soon, an equally tyrannical power of law surged from Xiao Chen's body. The appearance of this power of law stunned Yu Shujin at first, then she said with a grim expression, The 5 elements of law, that's right. The power of law that suddenly appeared in Xiao Chen's body was the level 3 law of the 5 elements. In 5 years, Xiao Chen had comprehended the 5 elements of law, and the 5 elements of law could be said to be the nemesis of the sealing law. The sealing law could seal everything in the world, even the space law of a divine lord. However, there were 2 laws in the world that the sealing law couldn't seal. One was the time law, and the other was the 5 elements of law. Needless to say, the time law was like the rotation of gears. No one or anything could stop the flow of time, so the sealing law couldn't seal time. As for the 5 elements of law, the 5 elements were endless, so the sealing law couldn't seal them either. After hearing that Yu Shujin had comprehended the sealing law, Xiao Chen was no longer worried because the 5 elements of law that he had comprehended were the nemesis of the sealing law. Therefore, Yu Shujin's sealing law was completely useless in front of Xiao Chen. Of course, this didn't mean that the 5 elements of law were stronger than the sealing law. The power of law was mutually reinforcing and restraining. For example, Yu Shujin's sealing law could restrain the space law of a divine lord, but it was restrained by Xiao Chen's 5 elements of law. If the sealing law couldn't be sealed, then it was naturally useless. Sensing the 5 elements of law that erupted from Xiao Chen's body, Yu Shujin's eyes flashed with surprise at first, but she soon calmed down. Looking at the smile on Xiao Chen's face, Yu Shujin said indifferently, "The 5 elements of law, not bad." At this moment, Xiao Chen had already used the 5 elements of law to break the seal of the sealing law. After moving his hands, Xiao Chen took the initiative to attack. He broke Yu Shujin's sealing law without any pressure. Seeing this scene, Qin Shuru, Xianyuan Ling, Tian Mushi, and the others secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Yu Shujin's sealing law was the most dreadful, but now it seemed that the sealing law had no effect on Xiao Chen. After comprehending the 5 elements of law, Xiao was Yu Shujin's nemesis. Isn't this called, everything has its vanquisher? Looking at the fierce battle in the sky, Long Yang revealed a lazy smile. It was true that there was always something to overcome something else. The space law of the Divine Lord was known as the strongest power of law, yet it was unable to do anything to Yu Shujin's sealing law. Now, Xiao Chen had comprehended the 5 elemental laws, which rendered Yu Shujin's sealing law powerless. However, just as Long Yang's voice fell, Yu Shujin, who was fighting fiercely in the sky again, said with a smile on her face, "The 5 elements of law can indeed restrain the sealing law, but Xiao Chen, do you really think this restraint is perfect?" Yu Shujin's sealing law once again emerged on Xiao Chen. This time, it was only aimed at Xiao Chen's right hand. Yu Shujin wanted to seal Xiao Chen's right hand, which was holding the sword. Seeing this, Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't be careless. He immediately mobilized the power of the 5 elements of law. For a moment, he lost feeling in his right hand, but it was quickly broken by the 5 elements of law. In less than a breath's time, the sealing law's power was broken by the 5 elements of law. However, at Xiao Chen's and Yu Shujin's level, a blink of an eye was enough to change a lot of things. Therefore, the moment Xiao Chen lost feeling in his right hand, Yu Shujin instantly attacked. She slashed out with her sword, and the tip of the sword slashed out and instantly hit Xiao Chen, leaving a deep wound on his chest. "I don't need to completely seal you. I only need to slow you down a little, and that will be enough to give me a chance to severely injure you," Yu Shujin said indifferently after hitting him with her sword. Xiao Chen didn't reply to Yu Shujin. He activated the tempered battle body, and the wound on his chest quickly healed. Afterwards, Xiao Chen erupted with the power of the 5 elements, forming a layer around him to block Yu Shujin's sealing law. However, even so, Yu Shujin's sealing law was still impossible to guard against. At that moment, Yu Shujin no longer had any extravagant hopes of sealing Xiao Chen with the sealing law. She only needed to slow Xiao Chen down for a moment, and that would be enough. As for Xiao Chen, he was fully on guard against Yu Shujin's sealing law. The two of them fought fiercely as they clashed with the power of law. For a moment, it seemed like they had returned to where they were before. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The battle returned to a tense state. Xiao Chen couldn't do anything to Yu Shujin, and Yu Shujin couldn't do anything to Xiao Chen either. In the fierce battle, all kinds of powerful saint-level martial arts techniques were constantly displayed by the two of them. The battle was even more intense than before. At this point in the battle, even the many prodigies from the 7th realm were slowly starting to be shocked. Looking at the battle in the sky, a prodigy from the 7th realm whispered, "This is the first time I've seen someone fight with an air to this extent. The 7th wilderness saint is quite strong, but unfortunately, he's still going to lose." Xiao Chen's combat power was indeed very strong, and the prodigies from the 7th realm all admitted this. Even so, they still didn't think that Xiao Chen had any chance of winning. The reason was very simple: cultivation. Although Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin were locked in battle now, that was because Yu Shujin had taken the initiative to suppress her cultivation. Once she stopped suppressing it and her cultivation returned to the minor perfection of Dao Quasi-Saint realm, The difference of one small realm was enough to break the balance between the two of them. With the difference in cultivation, it was destined that Xiao Chen couldn't win. Unfortunately, if Xiao Chen had the same cultivation as Yu Shujin, it would be hard to say who would win this battle. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen's cultivation was one small realm lower than Yu Shujin's. The battle in the sky couldn't be decided for a long time. The two of them couldn't do anything to each other. At this point in the battle, Yu Shujin also understood that it was very difficult for her to defeat Xiao Chen in the same realm. After fighting for so long, Yu Shujin was also satisfied. It was almost time to collect the immortal crystal spirit vein. She took the initiative to retreat and looked at Xiao Chen. "You're not bad. I'm very satisfied with this battle. I won't kill you. You can leave." Yu Shujin was already satisfied. There was no need to continue fighting with Xiao Chen. Moreover, Yu Shujin was confident that once she stopped suppressing her cultivation, Xiao Chen wouldn't be her opponent at all. Therefore, Yu Shujin said this. "Please collect, vote, recommend. Sword Master 8 Desolation." Chapter 1564. In fact, Yu Shujin was not very interested in killing Xiao Chen. In Yu Shujin's opinion, Xiao Chen was not her match now, and Xiao Chen would not be her match in the future. The reason was very simple. As long as Yu Shujin obtained the heavenly spiritual vein, she would be able to attain the immortal realm and condense the heavenly immortal mansion. At that time, the gap between her and Xiao Chen would be infinitely widened. By then, Yu Shujin would be able to kill Xiao Chen with a single strike of his sword. The immortal crystal spiritual vein was the most important thing. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen had no intention of retreating after hearing Yu Shujin's words. His face was calm as he said with determination, "The battle has not ended yet. How can you say that it's over?" Xiao Chen had no intention of retreating. Hearing this, displeasure flashed across Yu Shujin's eyes. She then said indifferently, "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Yu Shujin did not kill Xiao Chen because she felt that Xiao Chen would not be a threat to her in the future. Moreover, Yu Shujin felt very refreshed after the battle with Xiao Chen today. Therefore, she spared his life. However, since Xiao Chen did not know what was good for him, she could not blame him. As soon as she finished speaking, a soaring aura suddenly erupted from Yu Shujin's body. At this moment, Yu Shujin did not suppress her cultivation anymore. Her cultivation of the perfection quasi-saint realm suddenly erupted. Yu Shujin looked at Xiao Chen and said indifferently, "There is a gap in cultivation. You should know that you have no chance of winning. It seems that you want to die wholeheartedly." She no longer suppressed her cultivation and looked at Xiao Chen. Yu Shujin did not give Xiao Chen a chance to reply. She took a step forward and appeared in front of Xiao Chen in an instant. Then, she slashed out fiercely with her sword. Xiao Chen reacted unhappily to Yu Shujin's sword. He raised his sword to block the attack. However, this time, Xiao Chen was directly pushed back by Yu Shujin's sword. They were no longer evenly matched like before. Just by relying on her cultivation, Yu Shujin had already gained the upper hand. When they saw Yu Shujin forcing Xiao Chen back with a single sword strike, the seventh wilderness saints seemed to recall that they had no chance of winning this battle at all. Previously, Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin were evenly matched, and it was hard to tell who was the winner. Everyone was almost finished. From the beginning to the end, Yu Shujin took the initiative to suppress her cultivation to fight with Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin's cultivation were not at the same level. Therefore, it was impossible for Xiao Chen to win this battle. As Yu Shujin unleashed her full power and no longer suppressed her cultivation, she forced Xiao Chen back with one strike. Only then did the seventh wilderness saints realize that Yu Shujin's cultivation was higher than Xiao Chen's. The hope in their eyes quickly faded. It was impossible to win this battle. There was no chance of winning at all. It was impossible for Yu Shujin to defeat someone who was a higher level than her. As the heir of Hachibra Senkai's 7th realm, it would be unheard of if Yu Shujin was defeated by Xiaoqin, who was a higher level than her. The hope in their eyes turned to despair. However, Xiaoqian's expression did not change much at this time. Even after being forced back by Yu Shujin's sword, Xiaoqian's face was still calm. He even took the initiative to attack Yu Shujin with his sword. Seeing that Xiaoqian still had no intention of retreating, Yu Shujin's eyes flashed with a trace of murderous intent. She said coldly, "Reckless." In Yu Shujin's opinion, Xiaoqian was reckless. She had already let him go, but Xiaoqian still took the initiative to court death. This made Yu Shujin's murderous intent quickly condense in her heart. Another fierce battle ensued. However, the situation this time was completely different from before. After not taking the initiative to suppress her cultivation, Yu Shujin clearly had the upper hand. Although Xiaoqian could still resist for a while with his powerful combat strength, this was only temporary. If the battle went on for a long time, Xiaoqian would definitely lose. Is the first saint of the 7th wilderness out of his mind? He knows that he is no match for her, but he still wants to be arrogant? Many geniuses of the 7th realm said disdainfully at this time. In their opinion, Xiaoqian was simply courting death. Yu Shujin had already intended to let him go, but this person did not appreciate it. Haha, he was indeed courting death. No one thought that Xiaoqian could defeat Yu Shujin, but Xiaoqian did not think so at this time. There was no fear in his eyes. On the contrary, there was a trace of excitement. No one knew why Xiaoqian was so excited. In the fierce battle, as everyone expected, Xiaoqian gradually fell into a disadvantageous position, while Yu Shujin's attacks became more and more violent. In the end, under everyone's gaze, Yu Shujin punched Xiaoqian in the abdomen. His entire body was blasted from the sky and slammed into a small hill not far away. The powerful force instantly turned the small hill into ashes and collapsed. Smoke and dust rose everywhere, and the gravel buried Xiaoqian in an instant. Seeing Xiaoqian being blasted away by a punch, Qin Shuru and the other 2 ladies cried out anxiously, "Darling!" She immediately tried to fly in Xiaoqian's direction, but Tian Mushi stopped her. "Don't go. What can you do if you go?" The 4 ladies were worried about Xiaoqian. They all looked at Xiaoqian, who was covered in dust and gravel. Yu Shujin, who stood proudly in the sky, said flatly, "You're courting death." With the gap in cultivation, Xiaoqian's defeat was inevitable. Facing such an outcome, the 7th wilderness's holy sons, especially the divine monarch, revealed a look of hesitation. Now that Xiaoqian had been defeated, should they still try to stop Yu Shujin? If they did, would they be able to stop Yu Shujin? And if they didn't, were they just going to watch Yu Shujin snatch the immortal crystal spirit vein? Then they could become immortals and form the heavenly immortal abode? For a moment, they didn't know what to do. However, Yu Shujin seemed to have seen through the divine monarch and the others' thoughts. She turned around and looked coldly at the people from the 7th wilderness. "I'm a little tired of this. Whoever stops me will die." Yu Shujin's willful temper rose again. Previously, she only wanted to fight Xiaoqian. But now, she only wanted to get the immortal crystal spirit vein as soon as possible. Therefore, if anyone dared to stop her, Yu Shujin would undoubtedly kill them with lightning speed. Xiaoqian was defeated. It seemed like no one could stop Yu Shujin. But to everyone's surprise, as soon as Yu Shujin's voice fell, the place where Xiaoqian was standing, although it was already covered in dust, suddenly emitted a terrifying aura. This aura had obviously surpassed the greater mastery of the quasi-saint stage and reached the lesser perfection of the quasi-saint stage. Upon sensing this aura, Yu Shujin's face sank and her eyes narrowed. He broke through? The sudden appearance of this lesser perfection of the quasi-saint stage aura was undoubtedly from Xiaoqian. In other words, Xiaoqian had broken through during the battle. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 1565. The sudden appearance of this terrifying aura stunned everyone present. Then, countless pairs of eyes looked at the place where Shao Chen was. Smoke and dust were rising, but at the same time, an aura of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm also soared into the sky. Breakthrough in battle. These words appeared in everyone's mind when they felt this terrifying aura. At the same time, a look of disbelief flashed across their eyes. Who would have thought that Shao Chen would actually make a breakthrough in battle? Under everyone's gaze, a figure slowly rose into the sky from the smoke and dust. It was Shao Chen. There was still a trace of blood at the corner of Shao Chen's mouth, but there was a smile on his face. In fact, Shao Chen was persistent in continuing the battle with Yu Shujin because his cultivation had already reached the limit of the greater perfection of the quasi-sage realm. He only needed an opportunity to break through to the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. Shao Chen treated Yu Shujin as this opportunity, or rather, he treated Yu Shujin as his whetstone. He used the enormous pressure that Yu Shujin gave him to forcefully break through the barrier of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. It had to be said that Shao Chen's idea was indeed very crazy. But many times, if one didn't go crazy, how could one break and then rebuild? In the end, Shao Chen still succeeded. Using the enormous pressure that Yu Shujin gave him, Shao Chen successfully broke through to the perfection of the quasi-sage realm. His cultivation was now on par with Yu Shujin's. Previously, his biggest weakness was his cultivation realm. Now, Shao Chen's breakthrough completely made up for this weakness. Shao Chen had a relieved smile on his face. To be honest, when he was fighting with Yu Shujin previously, Shao Chen wasn't confident because if he couldn't break through the bottleneck of the perfection of the quasi-sage realm, then he would naturally be defeated, and might even be killed by Yu Shujin. Facing Shao Chen's faint smile, Yu Shujin's eyes also flashed with surprise at the beginning, but she quickly regained her composure. Yu Shujin also did not expect that Shao Chen could break through to the perfection quasi-saint realm. But even so, Yu Shujin was not afraid of Shao Chen. Yu Shujin quickly recovered from her initial shock. She looked at Shao Chen and said indifferently, "You are gambling with your life." Yu Shujin obviously saw through Shao Chen's previous thoughts. Indeed, Shao Chen was gambling with his life. Hearing this, Shao Chen smiled and said, "But in the end, I won the bet, didn't I? Do you think that you can contend against me just because you have broken through to the perfection quasi-sage realm?" Yu Shujin said unhurriedly. "We won't know until we fight," Shao Chen said. Both of their cultivations were completely equal. Shao Chen no longer had a reason to be afraid of Yu Shujin. Hearing this, the killing intent in Yu Shujin's eyes completely erupted at this moment. She took a step forward and slashed the long sword in her hand directly at Shao Chen. This was the first time that Yu Shujin had made up her mind to kill Shao Chen since the start of the battle. Not for any other reason, but because Shao Chen made her feel very uncomfortable. Shao Chen actually dared to use her as a stepping stone to break through to the next cultivation. Sensing the killing intent on Yu Shujin's body, Shao Chen was not afraid at all. He also moved his feet and directly executed the mysterious sky steps, rushing toward Yu Shujin. Both of them did not give in and the fierce battle broke out again. But this time, facing Yu Shujin, Shao Chen was no longer like before. After breaking through to the next cultivation, Shao Chen's combat strength naturally rose as well. Shao Chen did not fall into a disadvantageous position in the fierce battle with Yu Shujin. Everything seemed to have returned to the previous situation. The two of them were entangled again, and it was difficult to determine the winner. Facing Shao Chen, who had the same cultivation as her, Yu Shujin found it difficult to gain any advantage. Although she did not hold back, she still could not defeat Shao Chen. Yu Shujin could not do anything to Shao Chen, and Shao Chen also seemed to be unable to do anything to Yu Shujin. Both of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged more than 100 moves. Looking at the battle that was much more intense than before, the geniuses of the seventh realm below could no longer be as calm as before. There was no other way. Previously, Yu Shujin was sure that she would win, but now it was different. Looking at the situation in front of them, it was really hard to say whether Yu Shujin could win or not. It was difficult to determine the winner. The only thing that made the geniuses of the seventh realm a little relieved was that Xiao Chen could not defeat Yu Shujin. That was the only thing worth rejoicing about. However, just as the geniuses of the seventh realm were thinking this, Xiao Chen suddenly slashed out with his sword, instantly using the spiritual slash. Xiao Chen had not used the spiritual slash for a long time. After 5 years of cultivation, Xiao Chen's spiritual slash, or rather the heavenly Tao sword embryo, had made great progress. Now, the spiritual slash was much stronger than before. He slashed out with his sword, and an invisible blade instantly sank into Yu Shujin's mind. This was the first time Yu Shujin had seen Xiao Chen's spiritual slash, so she was not prepared for it. By the time he realized that something was amiss, it was already too late. The spiritual slash struck Yu Shujin's soul mercilessly. In an instant, Yu Shujin couldn't help but let out a blood-curdling scream. Her eyes turned bloodshot as she bellowed. Spiritual attack. She didn't expect Xiao Chen to be able to use a spiritual attack. Moreover, it was so powerful. In terms of power, the spiritual slash from before was no weaker than a high-grade saint martial skill. With such a powerful attack, and the fact that Yu Shujin was not prepared for it, Yu Shujin's soul was obviously severely injured. With her soul severely damaged, Yu Shujin's aura had also become unstable. Xiao Chen naturally would not let go of her so easily after succeeding in his attack. He immediately leaped up and entangled Yu Shujin. After severely injuring Yu Shujin's saint soul, Xiao Chen's attacks became more violent, not giving Yu Shujin any time to catch her breath. Yu Shujin's soul was already severely injured, so her combat strength had obviously dropped a lot. For a moment, Yu Shujin was obviously at a disadvantage. She was no longer a match for Xiao Chen. After Xiao Chen successfully broke through to the perfect quasi-saint stage, there was almost no difference in their combat strength. Now that Yu Shujin was severely injured, the result was naturally destined. Yu Shujin was going to lose this battle. Seeing that Yu Shujin's defeat was inevitable, the sky prides of the seventh world naturally couldn't hold back anymore. They soared into the sky, intending to join the battle. However, the seventh wilderness chosens naturally wouldn't agree and joined the battle. A great battle broke out between the two sides again. However, such a battle had no effect on the result because as long as Yu Shujin was defeated, the sky prides of the seventh world wouldn't be able to do anything. The result was already destined. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1566. Yu Shujin's defeat was inevitable. Once Yu Shujin was defeated, the other geniuses from the seventh realm wouldn't be a threat anymore. A fierce battle broke out, but this time the seventh wilderness had the upper hand. Everyone's fighting spirit was soaring. On the other hand, the geniuses from the seventh realm all looked gloomy. Indeed, they also knew that the outcome of this battle was doomed. Xiao Chen and Yu Shujin were still fighting fiercely. They had already started to use their trump cards. As the heir of the seventh realm, Yu Shujin naturally had many trump cards, but so did Xiao Chen. Their trump cards collided. As the battle continued, Yu Shujin's situation became worse and worse. Originally, Yu Shujin's saint soul had been severely injured, so she wasn't suitable to continue fighting. The reason she was able to persist until now was because of her extraordinary strength. However, everyone had their limits, and Yu Shujin was about to reach her limit. She endured the intense pain from the depths of her soul. This kind of pain was on a completely different level from physical pain. It was simply inhumane torture. For the first time, her eyes showed reluctance. She looked at Xiao Chen. Yu Shujin had never thought that she would be the one to lose in the end. She didn't dare to accept this. She was only one step away from the immortal crystal spirit vein. But it was this one step that doomed Yu Shujin to never get the immortal crystal spirit vein again. Seeing the immortal crystal spirit vein about to be obtained by Xiaochen, one could imagine how Yu Shujin felt. She didn't want to give up, but what could she do? In her current state, she was no match for Xiaochen. Xiaochen. This was the first person of the same generation who had made Yu Shujin suffer such a huge loss. Yu Shujin's memory of Xiaochen was still fresh in her mind. Of course, this memory was more likely to be filled with resentment. However, Xiaochen didn't give Yu Shujin a chance in the face of her fear and resentment. Since he already had the absolute advantage, Xiaochen wouldn't be as willful as Yu Shujin. It could be said that this result was completely caused by Yu Shujin himself. It was his willfulness and arrogance that gave Xiaochen chances time and time again, which ultimately led to his defeat. If Yu Shujin had gone all out from the beginning and not given Xiaochen any chance, Xiaochen would probably have been defeated or even killed. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Since the outcome had already been decided, then no one could change it. After persisting for about an hour, Yu Shujin was really at the end of her rope. If this continued, she would probably die here. At this point, regardless of whether Yu Shujin was willing to accept it or not, this was the result. He had lost, and the immortal crystal spirit vein could only be given to Xiaochen. After taking a deep look at Xiaochen, Yu Shujin was not someone who could not recognize reality. She simply turned around and chose to leave. As Yu Shujin retreated, the other geniuses of the seventh realm naturally retreated as well. Seeing that the geniuses of the seventh realm retreated, Xiaochen didn't chase after them. It wasn't that he didn't want to keep Yu Shujin, but Xiaochen's condition was already very bad. Although he defeated Yu Shujin, Xiaochen was also seriously injured. After the battle, the geniuses of the seventh wilderness came to Xiaochen's side. Qin Shuru and the other three girls were even more concerned about Xiaochen. After swallowing a healing elixir, Xiaochen smiled at the four girls, indicating that he was fine. Then, he led everyone to the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein. This was the immortal crystal spirit vein, a peerless treasure that could allow one to reach the heavens in a single bound. At this time, Yu Shujin and the geniuses of the seventh realm had all retreated. The immortal crystal spirit vein really belonged to the seventh wilderness. Faced with this opportunity to reach the heavens in a single bound, Xiaochen felt like he was dreaming. He glanced at the people around him. Since he had defeated the geniuses of the seventh realm, the next step was to determine the ownership of the immortal crystal spirit vein. But just as Xiaochen looked over, Long Yang pushed Xiaochen to the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein and said with a smile, "Go, it belongs to you. Brother Long Yang, you." Upon hearing Long Yang's words, Xiaochen opened his mouth. But before he could finish his sentence, Tian Mushi interrupted him. "All right. Didn't we agree that the immortal crystal spirit vein would belong to whoever kills Yu Shujin? Now that Yu Shujin has been defeated by you, the immortal crystal spirit vein naturally belongs to you. Cut the crap and go in." Long Yang and Tian Mushi both expressed their opinions. Afterward, the Divine Lord and the other first sons who were lucky enough to survive nodded slightly at Xiaochen. It was obvious that they agreed with Long Yang and Tian Mushi. After this battle, Xiaochen had successfully confirmed his position as the first holy child of the seventh wilderness. In terms of cultivation, Xiaochen was undoubtedly the best among all the holy children of the seventh wilderness. As for his combat strength, it was obvious to everyone that he was absolutely powerful. Everyone recognized Xiaochen as the first holy child of the seventh wilderness. In that case, it was only natural that Xiaochen obtained the immortal crystal spirit vein. Upon seeing this, Xiaochen scanned the crowd and finally fixed his eyes on Qin Shuru, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others. Upon seeing this, everyone nodded at Xiao Chun. After taking a deep breath, Xiao Chun finally walked into the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein under everyone's watchful eyes. And as soon as Xiao Chun entered, the entrance of the immortal crystal spirit vein disappeared. It was apparent that the immortal crystal spirit vein belonged to Xiao Chun alone. Back to the time when Yu Shujin and the others were retreating, outside the northern underworld celestial realm, in the endless starry sky, the heavenly way was rushing toward the northern underworld celestial realm. He had been paying attention to the situation in the northern underworld celestial realm. Now that Xiao Chun and the others were about to win, the heavenly way immediately set off and rushed toward the northern underworld celestial realm. However, just as the heavenly way was about to reach the northern underworld celestial realm, a figure appeared in front of him and blocked his way. This person was none other than the heavenly way's old rival, the realm lord of the Hachibra Senkai's seventh realm, Luoli. Upon seeing Luoli, the heavenly way's eyes flashed with a cold glint, and he said indifferently, "Luoli, your seventh realm has already lost." "I know." Upon hearing that, Luoli revealed a gentle smile and said, "Then why are you still stopping me?" The heavenly way snorted coldly. "Haha, why? Are you afraid? Are you afraid that your scandals will be known by others?" "The seventh wilderness." Luoli smiled and said. Upon hearing Luoli's words, the heavenly way's eyes flashed with anger and he immediately attacked without saying a word. The two most powerful almighties in the world were exchanging blows at this moment. It was so shocking that it could be said that they were existences that could destroy the world. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1567. The will of the heavenly way and Luoli's battle was beyond terrifying. However, during the battle, it was obvious that the will of the heavenly way was eager to escape, as if there was something urgent. On the other hand, Luoli was not in a hurry. He just wanted to delay the will of the heavenly way. Being entangled by Luoli, the will of the heavenly way could not escape for a while. He immediately shouted coldly, "Luoli, what do you want?" "Oh, nothing. The seventh realm's heir of Kunlun is going to change. Xiao Chun is not bad. I think highly of him," Luoli said with a faint smile. Hearing Luoli's words, the will of the heavenly way's eyes immediately turned cold. He then sneered and said, "Luoli, do you think it's possible? Xiao Chun will go back to your seventh realm?" "Haha, that's hard to say. Xiao Chun will know a lot of things when he obtains the power of all living things. By then, I'm afraid that the will of the heavenly way will no longer be a noble existence in his eyes, right?" Luoli laughed. "The power of all living things?" Hearing this, the will of the heavenly way's eyes became gloomier and his expression became extremely ugly. The power of all living things might be unfamiliar to the world, but it would be very familiar if it was changed to another name. It was the immortal crystal spiritual vein. That's right. The power of all living things that Luoli mentioned was the immortal crystal spiritual vein that the will of the heavenly way mentioned. The two were the same thing, but they were called by different names. What exactly was in the power of all living things that made Luoli so confident that Xiao Chun would change his view of the will of the heavenly way after obtaining the power of all living things? No one knew. Upon hearing Luoli's words, the will of the heavenly way said coldly with a gloomy expression, "Luoli, you've already planned this. Originally, Luoli had threatened the will of the heavenly way with the gate of the immortal realm to open the northern underworld, immortal world. The will of the heavenly way thought that Luoli only wanted the power of all living things to help Yu Shujin break through to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manor. But now, it seemed that Luoli's plan wasn't that simple. In the face of the will of the heavenly way's angry roar, Luoli chuckled and said, "It's not as complicated as you think. Originally, I only wanted Shujin to obtain the power of all living things to advance to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manor. But Shujin failed to live up to expectations and was defeated by Xiaochen. As a result, I'm naturally very interested in that little guy called Xiaochen. And this little guy obtained the power of all living things to advance to the immortal realm and establish the heavenly immortal manner. It just so happens that he will become the heir of the seventh realm, Luoli said with a smile. Upon hearing this, the will of the heavenly way was infuriated. He didn't expect things to develop like this. And now, what the will of the heavenly way cared about the most was that Xiaochen would find out about the power of all living things after he obtained it. When that time came, what exactly could make the will of the heavenly way so nervous? Naturally, only Xiaochen could find out the secret. While the will of the heavenly way was being held back by Luoli, Xiaochen had already entered the immortal crystal spirit vein, or rather, the power of all living things. Walking in the power of all living things, this place was very different from what Xiaochen had imagined. It was like an endless path of light that was shrouded in white light. It didn't look like a spirit vein at all. However, as Xiaochen walked in the path of light, the white light suddenly began to enter Xiaochen's brain. Then, Xiaochen's consciousness began to blur. Along with a burst of dizziness, Xiaochen seemed to have entered another world. In this world, heaven and earth were just formed, and many creatures were born together with heaven and earth. With the emergence of heaven and earth and many creatures, the embryonic form of the world was also presented to Xiaochen. In the beginning, everything was fine. Many creatures used their power to provide for heaven and earth used this power to provide for the creatures so that the creatures could live as long as heaven and earth. Both sides were like a cycle of reincarnation. Heaven and earth relied on the power of the saints to grow, and the saints also lived in heaven and earth. But soon, with the appearance of the will of heaven and earth, everything changed. The creatures continued to use their power to provide for heaven and earth, but the will of heaven and earth began to enslave them. Perhaps people nowadays had forgotten that heaven and earth and all creatures were actually equal. Both sides could be said to have a relationship of mutual benefit. All creatures nurtured heaven and earth nurtured all creatures. This relationship of equality was completely changed with the appearance of the will of the heavenly way. The will of heaven and earth extracted the ancestral spirits of all creatures and integrated them into heaven and earth. Without the ancestral spirits, all creatures could not live as long as heaven and earth. At the same time, the will of heaven and earth also fabricated lies to deceive all creatures. It said that all creatures were created by heaven and earth, and that heaven was the father and earth was the mother. It attempted to enslave all creatures. Moreover, the will of the heavenly way also taught all creatures to cultivate. However, this kind of cultivation was actually a joke. This was because the will of heaven and earth had extracted the ancestral spirit. After all creatures were born, they had no ability to improve themselves at all. They could only rely on cultivation to obtain power. It could be said that the will of the heavenly way first took away the power of all creatures, and then gave them the method of cultivation. Moreover, all creatures were extremely grateful to it. They should have been two sides of equality, but now all creatures were completely enslaved. Moreover, this was nothing. The will of the heavenly way established life and death, and told all creatures that everyone would be born, grow old, get sick, and die. This was the reincarnation of heaven, and it could not be changed. However, little did they know that all those who died were actually used as nourishment by the will of the heavenly way to nourish itself. All creatures should have lived as long as heaven and earth, because they were born together with heaven and earth. It could be said that they were born from the same mother. However, now, the will of the heavenly way took away the power of all creatures, and treated them as slaves and nourishment. It used the flesh and blood of all creatures to nourish heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the flesh and blood of all creatures, the power of heaven and earth became stronger and stronger, while the power of all creatures became weaker and weaker. In the end, the will of the heavenly way used the power of heaven and earth to construct the laws, and these laws were rules that heaven and earth used to control all creatures. They were rules set by heaven and earth, and all creatures could only obtain power from the laws of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth completely enslaved all creatures, but in the end, many powerhouses among the creatures stood up and rebelled against heaven and earth. This was the time when the will of the heavens was passed down. Unable to accept being enslaved by heaven and earth, all creatures chose to rebel. However, the end result was predictable. All creatures were suppressed, and the powerhouses who led the resistance were killed one by the will of the heavenly way. Scenes flashed through Xiao Qian's mind. Looking at this scene, a look of shock and doubt appeared in his eyes. For a moment, he couldn't accept everything in his mind. Moreover, through this information, Xiao Qian also knew that the place he was in now was not an immortal crystal spirit vein, but the power of all creatures. The power of all creatures was actually the power gathered by all creatures. It was to allow all creatures to obtain the power to resist the will of heaven, to break the laws of heaven, and to break free from the enslavement of the will of heaven. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 1568. They came from the same origin and were born together. But if the images that he saw were real, wouldn't it mean that everything he came into contact with since he was young was a lie? It was the will of the heavenly way that deprived all living beings of their ancestral spirits and turned the saints into the products of heaven and earth, while heaven and earth became the object of worship for all living beings. Not only were there ancestral spirits, but there were also so-called races mentioned in the images, which were actually created by the will of the heavenly way. As the will of the heavenly way didn't wish for all living beings to be united and had hoped that they would fight among themselves, the will of the heavenly way created racial divisions. In fact, when heaven and earth were born and all living beings first appeared, there were no races at all and all living beings were equal. All living beings who were supposed to be on par with heaven and earth were forcefully suppressed by heaven and earth into working hard and rearing cattle and sheep in captivity. Everything was different from what he imagined. It could also be said that if all of this was real, it would almost overturn Xiao Qian's entire outlook on life and the world. The will of the heavenly way enslaved all living beings. How was that possible? Who could accept such a fact in such a short time? He didn't expect to see such a scene one day. The so-called heaven is the father and earth is the mother saying was actually all a lie. Of course, would Xiao Qian believe the images before his eyes? He wasn't sure yet. After all, it was impossible for Xiao Qian to believe with just these images. But now, it didn't matter whether Xiao Qian believed it or not. Because at that moment, the white light from all directions was constantly converging into Xiao Qian's body. The white light was the power of all living beings. After absorbing the power of all living beings, Xiao Qian's ancestral spirits changed and recovered. And once the ancestral spirits recovered, Xiao Qian would be reborn. There would be a huge metamorphosis in all aspects, and even his talents would be improved. It could be said that the power of all living beings was all the power left behind by all living beings in order to resist heaven and earth. In this way, the will of the heavenly way's words were easily proven to be true. Before the northern underworld celestial realm existed, the will of the heavenly way said that the immortal crystal spirit vein could only allow one person to break through to the immortal realm. That was true. However, the real reason why the will of the seventh wilderness didn't use this immortal crystal spirit vein was because it wasn't a spirit vein at all, but the power of all living beings. Of course, if someone were to enter it, that person would know the grudges between heaven and earth and all living beings. When that happened, wouldn't the lies of heaven and earth? Of course, the will of the heavenly way, and the will of the heavenly way, didn't want anyone to know the will of the heavenly way, the will of the heavenly ways of the heavenly way. The heavenly way's source of power came from heaven and heaven and earth's power came from all living beings. The will of the heavenly way had made such a shocking lie, but Shao Chun had found out about it today. Therefore, even though Shao Chen's body was constantly being infused with white light, and his cultivation was also increasing. However, Shao Chen's entire body was like a single character at this moment. There was no reaction at all. It couldn't be helped. Shao Chen found it hard to accept this fact. Moreover, if this was the case, then the Hachibra Senkai were not invaders. They represented all living beings who wanted to fight against the will of the heavenly way. They were not evil beyond redemption. On the contrary, for people like Shao Chen, the Hachibra Senkai was a closer companion. It was the complete opposite, the complete opposite. The will of the heavenly Tao, which was revered by everyone, was now the greatest enemy. Heaven and earth had deceived all living beings, treating them as livestock and endless nourishment. He was completely dumbfounded. All of this was beyond Shao Chen's imagination. Shao Chen did not even feel anything when his cultivation base kept rising. At that moment, however, Shao Chen felt as though his heart was in a mess. He simply could not describe what he was feeling. While Shao Chen was in a state of confusion, the people from the seventh wilderness scattered in all directions to collect the spiritual herbs in the northern underworld immortal realm. Although they were no longer qualified to obtain the immortal crystal spiritual vein, the spiritual treasures in the northern underworld immortal realm still made them excited. It should be known that the treasures in the northern underworld immortal realm were not only precious, but many of them were also extinct in the outside world. Thinking about it, if they could bring these spiritual treasures out, each of them would be priceless. Moreover, many of them would be of great help to the cultivation of the saints. There were indeed many good things. Therefore, as they continued to collect these good things, their spirits gradually rose. Everyone could be said to have gained a lot. Of course, no one knew what Shao Chen had encountered. Perhaps in their opinion, after entering the immortal crystal spiritual vein, Shao Chen had probably started to cultivate. They knew nothing about what had happened to Shao Chen. As for the outside world, in the starry sky, Luoli and the will of the heavenly way, no one knew about it. Dtion of the seventh wilderness and Luoli, the realm lord of the seventh realm, had been fighting fiercely for a long time. However, until now, both of them seemed to be fine. With their strength, it would be very difficult for them to die even if they wanted to. However, after such a long and fierce battle, Luoli was getting more relaxed, while the will of the heavenly way's face was getting gloomier and gloomier. Calculating the time, Shao Chen should have obtained the power of living beings by now. In that case, Shao Chen should have some understanding of what had happened in the past. After understanding what kind of person the will of the heavenly way was, as one of the living beings in the world, would Shao Chen still be willing to worship such a will of the heavenly way? Would he still be willing to live under the so-called protection of heaven and earth? Luoli had a faint smile in his eyes, and the will of the heavenly way obviously guessed what he was thinking. After a fierce battle, the will of the heavenly way was the first to stop. He looked coldly at Luoli and shouted, "Luoli, do you think you can change anything by doing this? Heaven and earth are supreme. This is already a mark engraved in the souls of all living beings. How can a mere Shao Chen shake it?" The will of the heavenly way didn't choose to attack again, because he knew that Shao Chen must have obtained the power of living beings. It was impossible to stop him now. He could only think of other ways. Seeing that the will of the heavenly way didn't intend to continue attacking, Luoli smiled and said, 1,000 miles of dike can be destroyed by an ant's nest. Paper can't wrap fire. The living beings of the seventh wilderness aren't fools. Heaven and earth want to suppress all living beings and make them work like cattle and horses. That's just wishful thinking. Wake up soon. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1569. the will of the heavenly way, and Luoli didn't attack again. After all, they had achieved their goal. Shao Chun had probably obtained the power of living beings. Therefore, even if the will of the heavenly way rushed to the northern underworld, it would be useless. Since they had succeeded, there was no reason for them to continue attacking. Therefore, Luoli and the will of the heavenly way stood facing each other. Neither of them had the intention to attack. Shao Chun might have known everything from the power of living beings, but the will of the heavenly way couldn't stop it now. Even if he was the will of the heavenly way, he couldn't enter the power of living beings, let alone destroy it. For all living beings, the power of living beings was an absolute great opportunity. For the will of the heavenly way, the power of living beings was the resentment and hatred of all living beings towards him. All living beings didn't want to be suppressed by the world, and they didn't want to be enslaved by the world. That was why the power of living beings existed. To put it bluntly, the appearance of the power of living beings was because all living beings wanted to resist and stand up anew. Hearing Luoli's words, the will of the heavenly way sneered. It was because there was no one else present. Otherwise, if others saw this, even the Wine Taoist and the others, they would be frightened by the will of the heavenly way's current expression. Gloomy and evil. At this moment, the will of the heavenly way didn't have the usual righteous feeling. It was as if he was a completely different person. Looking at Luoli with a sneer, the will of the heavenly way sneered. Luoli, don't be happy too early. Your 8 Desolation Temple has now been dragged into a quagmire. It's simply a joke if you want to conquer 8 Desolation. Just wait, it won't be long before your 7th realm will roll back on its own. Will of the heavenly way said coldly. Hearing this, Luoli smiled and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Will of the heavenly way also disappeared. No one knew that a great battle had taken place here. Following the departure of the will of the heavenly way, Luoli also disappeared from the sky. The originally pitch-black starry sky once again regained its calm. The battle between Will of the heavenly way and Luoli had ended, but Shao Chen's breakthrough was also beginning. At this time, Shao Chen was breaking through to the Great Sage realm. With the help of the power of living beings, it was actually not too difficult for Shao Chen to break through to the Great Sage realm. However, what Shao Chen really cared about at this time was the recovery of the ancestral spirit. The ancestral spirits should be said to be a part of the soul. Originally, all the saints wanted to have it, but unfortunately, it was forcibly taken away by the world. Moreover, from then on, the descendants of all living beings would no longer have the ancestral spirits. To put it bluntly, the ancestral spirits were a gift from the world to all living beings. With the ancestral spirits, all living beings would probably have the talent of a heaven's pride. Cultivation was almost as simple as eating and drinking. Without the ancestral spirits, it proved that the talent had been taken away by others. Therefore, it was so difficult for all living beings to cultivate. In fact, there was no way to verify the ancient matters now. However, one thing was certain, and that was, the talent of the warriors who had the ancestral spirits would be at least 90 meters and above. What kind of concept was this? In other words, when the world was first formed, the weakest talent of all living beings born with the world was at least 90 meters. In other words, it meant that at the time, a random last place or a piece of trash would be at least a quasi-saint in the present day. It was even possible for them to compete for the position of the Holy Son. This was the horror of the ancestral spirit. Unfortunately, they were forcibly taken away by the world in the end. Without the ancestral spirits, all living beings were like old men who had their teeth pulled out. It was simply countless times more difficult to cultivate. In addition, the will of the heavenly way created a heavenly punishment to restrict the breakthroughs of all living beings. It could be said that when the ancestral spirits were taken away, it was equivalent to all living beings being forcibly knocked down a level by the world. As a result, they became the slaves of the world. The most important thing about the power of living beings was to help warriors recover their ancestral spirit. This was more important than the improvement of cultivation. In fact, it was precisely because of the recovery of the ancestral spirits that one could use the power of living beings to break through to the immortal realm and condense the heavenly immortal mansion. Time passed day by day. In the power of living beings, Shao Chen sat cross-legged. He was already surrounded by rich white light. It was unknown how much time had passed. At this time, Shao Chen's cultivation had reached the limit of the great sage great perfection realm. Moreover, the ancestral spirits in his body had also been successfully formed. Somehow, Shao Chen felt that his talent seemed to have improved a lot. Shao Chen's talent was 99 meters. Originally, it was the same as Sir God, Tianmushi, Long Yang, and others. But now, because of the formation of the ancestral spirits, Shao Chen felt that his talent had probably reached the maximum value of 100. The difference of 1 meter between 99 and 100 for a maximum value talent should not be underestimated. Sometimes, a difference of a millimeter could be a difference of 1,000 miles. This difference of 1 meter was like heaven and earth. The maximum value talent was already considered rare even in the ancient times when all living beings had just appeared. At that time, although all living beings still had ancestral spirits and cultivation was extremely simple, those who could reach the maximum value talent were absolutely rare. Most of them were still between 90 to 95 meters. The ancestral spirits only allowed all living beings in ancient times to cultivate, and their talents were very good. However, a prodigy was still a prodigy. There were still not many people who could reach the maximum value talent. To put it simply, the ancestral spirits only allowed the saints to have a higher starting point. They could feel the spirit of heaven and earth when they were born. The ancestral spirits had taken shape, and in the abdomen, Shao Chen could clearly feel that the original Dantian began to evolve like the Holy Realm Mansion. It was originally a ball-shaped Dantian, but at this moment, it was as if it was about to break out of its shell. Layers of cracks had already appeared on its surface, and from within, strands of extremely pure spiritual qi were continuously spreading out. His eyes were closed all the time, like an old monk in meditation. After a long time, the Dantian in Shao Chen's body finally burst open with a bang. The Dantian burst open. Immediately, in the original position of the Dantian in Shao Chen's abdomen, a golden holy realm mansion about the size of a palm condensed. It looked very exquisite and small, and it was also very temporary. Even the carvings on the top of the Holy Realm Mansion could be seen. This was Shao Chen's Holy Realm Mansion, and it was a heavenly Holy Realm Mansion. The Holy Realm Mansion condensed by using the power of living beings was the Heavenly Holy Realm Mansion. With the initial formation of the Heavenly Holy Realm Mansion, the breakthrough barrier of the Holy Realm in Shao Chen's body was also naturally broken at this time. For a time, Shao Chen's aura also rose. From the great sage great perfection, it was almost only a few seconds, and he quickly rushed to the Holy Realm level. With Shao Chen's breakthrough, the space above the northern underworld celestial realm was torn apart, and a strong pressure slammed down fiercely. Heaven's punishment, this was heaven's punishment. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. Chapter 1570. The heavenly punishment suddenly appeared in the northern underworld immortal realm, and its target seemed to be the immortal crystal spirit vein where Shao Chen was. It had been almost half a year since Shao Chen entered the immortal crystal spirit vein. At this time, many heaven's prides in the northern underworld immortal realm had already collected all kinds of heaven and earth treasures in the northern underworld immortal realm, and then began to cultivate. Although Shao Chen was the only one who obtained the immortal crystal spirit vein, the spiritual energy in the northern underworld immortal realm was so rich that it was indeed a good place for others to cultivate. It had been almost half a year of cultivation, and during this period, Shao Chen didn't make any movements. However, the heavenly punishment suddenly appeared in the sky today, and that kind of power made everyone present feel a chill down their spines. Shao Chen broke through? Soon, someone guessed that this heavenly punishment was probably related to Shao Chen. After all, no one present had broken through a major realm, so there shouldn't be any heavenly punishment. Moreover, looking at how terrifying this heavenly punishment was, it obviously couldn't be the heavenly punishment of the Great Sage realm. It was estimated that such a heavenly punishment would only appear after breaking through to the immortal realm. Shao Chen had broken through to the immortal realm. Realizing this, everyone was both surprised and delighted. They were delighted that Shao Chen had indeed succeeded, and they were shocked that he had broken through to the immortal realm in just half a year. Was this immortal crystal spirit vein really so powerful? It could allow a person to break through to the immortal realm from the perfection of the quasi-sage realm in half a year. This was indeed something that no one dared to think about. Everyone was shocked, but at this time, the heavenly punishment in the sky, which was originally terrifying, actually closed slowly without any warning. It dissipated. The heavenly punishment hasn't descended, and it dissipated? Looking at the slowly dissipating black hole, everyone couldn't understand what it meant. The heavenly punishment hasn't descended yet, so how could it dissipate? Naturally, everyone didn't know the secret of the force of living beings. Shao Chen had absorbed the force of living beings, reformed the ancestral spirit, condensed the heavenly immortal mansion, and stepped into the immortal realm. In this way, what could this heavenly punishment do to Shao Chen? The saints were equal to the heavens and earth, so why would the heavens and earth send down heavenly punishment when the saints broke through? Shao Chen now had the power of all living beings, so the heavenly punishment couldn't do anything to him. Therefore, after the heavenly punishment appeared, it disappeared without a trace. This wasn't strange at all. The divine punishment vanished, and Shao Chen, who was seated in the universal force, sensed it as well. The breakthrough had ended, and Shao Chen had absorbed and refined all the universal force in the surroundings. His mind was still replaying everything he had seen. The world treated all living beings like dogs, and all living beings rose up to wage war against the world. Heaven and earth viewed all living beings as a source of power. At the same time, they did not wish for all living beings to be united. Heaven and earth had made up legends about different races, saying that every race was an enemy. This was all for the sake of causing the saints to fight amongst themselves. Heaven and earth were like outsiders, sitting high up on the fishing platform. In truth, there was no such thing as race. When heaven and earth first formed, all living beings accompanied each other. At that time, all living beings were equal, and there was no such thing as race. For a moment, Shao Chen didn't know how to face everything he had experienced in the past 6 months. After refining the universal force, Shao Chen could clearly sense that all living beings hated the injustice of the heavenly Tao, as well as their enmity towards heaven and earth. After absorbing the universal force, Shao Chen became the hope of all living beings, the hope to break the rule of the heavenly Tao. Why was the heavenly Tao able to suppress all living beings? Why did the heavenly Tao put so many shackles on all living beings? Otherwise, how could all living beings truly grow? Shao Chen found it difficult to make up his mind. Was the heavenly Tao really the enemy of all living beings? If that was the case, then wouldn't the Hachibra Senkai be the friend of all living beings? Wouldn't it be an organization created by all living beings in order to resist the will of the heavenly way? All of this caused Shao Chen's worldview to collapse. The symbol of the past was actually the enemy of all living beings, and the enemy of the past was actually representing and fighting for all living beings. Everything had been completely reversed. However, it would probably take some time for Shao Chen to fully accept all of this. The heavenly Tao was really unfair. As warriors, we have to carry on the wishes of our ancestors and fight against the heavenly Tao to the end. We have to fight for ourselves. The angry roars of all living beings seemed to reverberate in his mind. After sighing helplessly, Xiao Chen slowly opened his eyes and looked around. The rich white light around him had completely dissipated, and the pure and gentle universal force had been completely absorbed by Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen looked inside his body and saw that his dantian had been occupied by the golden heavenly abode, which was emitting a soft, faint golden light. The heavenly abode was floating in Xiao Chen's abdomen, and wisps of extremely pure spiritual power were being devoured and refined by the heavenly abode. After breaking through, Xiao Chen wasn't as excited or happy as he had imagined. Instead, he was a little confused. After breaking through to the immortal state, Xiao Chen's strength was much stronger than before. To put it bluntly, it wouldn't be difficult for Xiao Chen to kill even the great sage like Yinyangzi. However, even though he suddenly possessed such terrifying power, Xiao Chen wasn't happy at all. This was because Xiao Chen didn't know where he should go. The matter of the heavenly Tao and all living beings made Xiao Chen confused. He was a member of all living beings. Was he going to become an enemy of the will of the heavenly way? Or was he going to forget this matter and treat it as if it had never happened? However, was this possible? Since he already knew the truth of the matter, no matter how much Xiao Chen wanted to forget, the truth was always in front of him. Xiao Chen really couldn't forget it. Xiao Chen's current feeling was as if one day, someone suddenly told him that the mother who loved him and raised him wasn't his biological mother. Instead, she was the enemy who killed his parents. His biological parents were killed by her. That was how he felt. What should he choose? After pondering for a long time, Xiao Chen couldn't find an answer at all. However, at this moment, because the power of living beings had been completely absorbed by Xiao Chen, the space began to collapse. At this time, Xiao Chen was forcefully teleported out by a mysterious force. Xiao Chen's vision turned dark and he returned to the northern underworld immortal realm. At this time, the space where the power of living beings was located had completely collapsed, and the entrance was gone. Seeing Xiao Chen suddenly appear, Qin Shuru and the other 3 women who had been guarding here naturally ran over immediately. They hadn't seen him for half a year, and his temperament had become more and more otherworldly. In particular, his eyes seemed to be able to make people fall in love with him. The 4 women all felt that in this short half a year, Xiao Chen seemed to have changed a lot. The change was indeed too great. Please collect, please vote, please recommend me. Chapter 1571. After breaking through to the immortal realm, everyone could feel an indescribable aura from Xiao Chen's body. It was as if it was the same as the heavens and the earth. In fact, this wasn't an illusion. Because Xiao Chen had absorbed the power of living beings, everyone naturally felt a sense of reverence when facing Xiao Chen. This wasn't strange. With Qin Shuru and the other 3 women in his arms, Xiao Chen forced a smile. To be honest, Xiao Chen's heart was still in a mess. He didn't know what choice he should make in the future. After struggling for a while, Xiao Chen still didn't tell everyone about this matter. He didn't even tell Qin Shuru and the other 3 women. After all, the heavens and the earth enslaved all living beings, and all living beings wanted to rebel against the heavens and the earth. Such a thing was indeed a bit too shocking. With a forced smile, Xiao Chen nodded and greeted everyone one after another. But at this moment, the figure of the will of the heavenly way suddenly appeared in the sky. With the arrival of the will of the heavenly way, everyone present immediately cupped their hands and bowed. Their attitude was absolutely respectful to the extreme. On the other hand, Xiao Chen might have bowed without hesitation before, but now, perhaps because he had absorbed the power of living beings, Xiao Chen wasn't willing to bow down to the will of the heavenly way. Therefore, among the crowd, only Xiao Chen stood proudly. His eyes met with the will of the heavenly way. Facing Xiao Chen's gaze, the will of the heavenly way's face didn't change at all. However, a faint chill flashed in the depths of his eyes. Xiao Chen condensed the heavenly immortal mansion and broke through to the immortal realm. In this way, he must have known everything. This wasn't difficult to see from Xiao Chen's eyes. The will of the heavenly way took a deep look at Xiao Chen, then said softly, "All right, this matter is over. You should go back." The matter of the northern underworld immortal realm had come to an end. The so-called immortal crystal spirit vein and the power of living had been completely absorbed by Xiao Chen. As soon as he finished speaking, the will of the heavenly way waved his hand slightly. Then, everyone felt an inexplicable force enveloping them, and they were all sent out of the northern underworld celestial realm. Xiao Chen didn't know what the will of the heavenly way meant to him, but he didn't think too much about it. He followed Wine Daoist and the others back to the seventh mainland. Along the way, Xiao Chen seemed to be in a daze. However, he didn't know where the will of the heavenly way had gone. After sending everyone out of the northern underworld celestial realm, the will of the heavenly way left directly. On the way back to the seventh mainland, Wine Daoist accompanied Xiao Chen and took a big gulp of wine. He looked at Xiao Chen and said with a smile, "Hey, you little brat. Well done, kid. You really gave me face this time. You defeated Yu Shujin, the heir of the seventh world. Not bad, not bad. Now you're the first holy son of the seventh wilderness. Ha!" Wine Daoist was very satisfied with Xiao Chen's performance in the northern underworld celestial realm. Moreover, Xiao Chen was now in the immortal realm. In terms of battle power, he wasn't much different from him. Of course, Wine Daoist's cultivation was higher than Xiao Chen's. There was the immortal Grandmaster realm above the immortal realm, and Wine Daoist was in the immortal Grandmaster realm. Wine Daoist said with a smile. However, Xiao Chen seemed to have a lot on his mind. Wine Daoist asked curiously, "What's wrong with you? Is there something on your mind? Tell me. Let me enlighten you." Xiao Chen clearly had something on his mind. Hearing that, Xiao Chen turned to look at Wine Daoist. They looked at each other without saying a word. Wine Daoist was a little numb from Xiao Chen's stare. Xiao Chen then said flatly, "Old man, let me ask you something. If the heavenly way is unfair one day, what will you do?" "The heavenly way is unfair?" Xiao Chen's words were very strange, but Daoist Wine was taken aback. He then yelled at Xiao Chen without any hesitation. "What the hell? You little brat, are you crazy? How can the heavenly way be unfair? Without the heavenly way there wouldn't be this world. Where would we live then? Don't let your imagination run wild." Wine Daoist's worship of the heavenly way was absolutely unquestionable. He wasn't an exception. In other words, in the seventh world, no matter what race or cultivation level, everyone held a heart of reverence for the heavenly way. It was like a sentence that the heavenly way once said, "Heaven is the father, earth is the mother." Reverence for the heavenly way. This was something that was engraved in the depths of people's souls. No one could change it. Everyone revered the heavenly way and treated the heavenly way as their parent. After hearing Wine Daoist's words, Xiao Chen smiled and a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. He was right. Even though he knew a lot of secrets, no one would believe him if he told them. On the contrary, many people would jump out and accuse him of being disrespectful to the heavenly way and that he was a sinner. It was useless to know the truth because the four of them wouldn't believe it. In that case, what should Xiao Chen do? Should he pretend that he didn't know and forget about this matter, or? He felt more and more depressed. Just like that, the group returned to the seventh continent's heavenly yin-yang sect. After returning to the Taiyang sect, Wine Daoist and Xiao Chen had a drink that night and left early the next morning. It was said that the heavenly way had ordered Wine Daoist and the other immortals to return to the front lines and not stay on the seventh continent any longer. After Wine Daoist left, the news that Xiao Chen had become the holy son of the seventh continent spread like wildfire. In an instant, Xiao Chen became the idol in the hearts of countless young people. Things seemed to be developing in a good direction, but Xiao Chen still couldn't feel happy. Xiao Chen simply couldn't ignore the secrets in his heart, let alone forget them. After Wine Daoist left, Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling returned to the Dragon Tribe and Xianyuan Ling to the Xianyuan clan. In the cave abode, Shao Chen, Qin Shuru, Qin Luo, Zhang Jingxiang, Shao Qing, and the rest of the family sat around the pavilion and ate. Seeing that Shao Chen had been depressed for the past few days, Qin Shuru couldn't help but ask, "Husband, is there something on your mind? You seem a little out of it these few days." As the closest people to Shao Chen, Qin Shuru and the other women naturally noticed that Shao Chen was acting strangely. However, Shao Chen didn't say anything. He drank the wine in his cup and shook his head. "It's nothing. Maybe it's because I broke through to the immortal realm too quickly, so I'm not used to it yet." Shao Chen still didn't tell the women what was on his mind. It wasn't that he wanted to hide it from them, but that he didn't know how to tell them about it. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Chapter 1572. He didn't know what to say to the girls. Of course, even Shao Chen himself was at a loss. He didn't know what to do. When they heard this, Qin Shuru and the other two women, as well as Shao Qing and Bai Ruyue, knew that Shao Chen had something on his mind. But if he didn't say anything, there was nothing they could do. He had been like this ever since he returned from the northern underworld immortal realm. Even when the outside world spread that Shao Chen was now the first holy son of the seventh wilderness, Shao Chen didn't seem to feel anything special. He was still deep in thought, as if he was making an important decision. Knowing that everyone was worried about him, Shao Chen forced a smile and said, "I'm fine. It's just that I've been under a lot of pressure recently. After breaking through to the immortal realm, it won't be long before I have to rush to the front line to fight against the Hachibra Senkai." He didn't want everyone to be too worried about him. But who knew that as soon as he finished speaking, a young man in gray suddenly appeared in the courtyard. The young man in gray was none other than the will of the heavenly way of the seventh wilderness. The will of the heavenly way appeared in front of everyone without any warning. Now, for a large number of people, the will of the heavenly way was no longer a secret. Because of the successful construction of the gate of the immortal realm, during this period of time, people like Yinyangzi, the great sage, and Shao Chen, the chosen of the saint ranking, had more or less come into contact with the will of the heavenly way. At the very least, they had seen the will of the heavenly way from afar. So this time, when the will of the heavenly way appeared, everyone was only slightly stunned. Then, Qin Shuru and the other three women all stood up and bowed respectfully. Unlike the others, Shao Chen didn't move at this time. His eyes were fixed on the will of the heavenly way. If it was before, Shao Chen definitely wouldn't think too much about it when the will of the heavenly way came in the middle of the night. But now, Shao Chen, who knew a lot of secrets, didn't know why he was instinctively on guard against the will of the heavenly way. Shao Chen didn't bow. Seeing this, Qin Shuru gently pulled the corner of Shao Chen's clothes and said, "Husband, that's the will of the heavenly way. What's wrong with you?" Qin Shuru secretly said anxiously when he saw that the will of the heavenly way didn't bow. But at this time, the will of the heavenly way smiled and said, "It's okay. I'm here today to have a good chat with Shao Chen." Upon hearing the will of the heavenly way's words, Qin Shuru and the others secretly heaved sighs of relief. On the other hand, Shao Chen's brows knitted even tighter. It's so late and the will of the heavenly way is here. It's too unusual. Besides, Shao Chen didn't know if it was his intuition or not, but he felt a sense of danger from the will of the heavenly way. There was no reason for it, but it was just a feeling. Could it be that the will of the heavenly way wants to kill me? At this thought, Shao Chen felt cold sweat trickling down his back. If that's the case, then, just because I know these secrets, the will of the heavenly way wants to kill me? Suddenly realizing this, Shao Chen felt a little regretful. If that's the case, I've been too careless. But is that really the case? Just because I know these secrets, the will of the heavenly way wants to kill me? The will of the heavenly way didn't speak, but Xiao Chen's mind was in a mess. At this moment, the will of the heavenly way said something that stunned Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen, you should know from the power of living beings, right? The power of living beings? Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen was taken aback. It was apparent that the will of the heavenly way was here for this. Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded slightly. Yes. Xiao Chen didn't know how to answer or what to say. At the same time, he also didn't know the will of the heavenly way's intentions. That was why he simply nodded slightly. On the other hand, Qin Shiru's group of 4, Xiao Qing, and Bai Rui were baffled as they listened to the conversation between Xiao Chen and the will of the heavenly way. They had no idea what the will of the heavenly way and Xiao Chen were talking about. At the same time, after hearing Xiao Chen's answer, the will of the heavenly way smiled faintly and said, "So you know. You already know? In that case, if I were to tell you that all of this is real, what would you think?" The will of the heavenly way chuckled. That smile was still as refreshing as a spring breeze. But at this moment, Xiao Chen had an extremely bad feeling in his heart. If it was only a guess before, after hearing these 2 sentences from the will of the heavenly way, Xiao Chen was almost certain that the will of the heavenly way was here to get rid of him today. Because he knew those secrets, the will of the heavenly way wanted to kill him and prevent those secrets from being exposed to the world. What he had been worried about had finally happened. After he found out about those secrets, Xiao Chen had been worried that the will of the heavenly way would eliminate him. That was why for the past few days, Xiao Chen hadn't mentioned a single word about the power of living beings to the people around him. If they didn't know these secrets, then the will of the heavenly way would have a reason to let them go. That was what Xiao Chen thought. As for running away, Xiao Chen had never thought about it. Even though he was now in the immortal state, where could he run to? Moreover, his opponent was the will of the heavenly way. As long as Xiao Chen was still in the 7th wilderness, the will of the heavenly way could easily sense him no matter where he was. Therefore, Xiao Chen had never thought of running away because it was simply unrealistic. Since he already had an answer in his heart, Xiao Chen forced himself to calm down and said to the will of the heavenly way with a serious expression, "They don't know anything. Let them rest first." The they that Xiao Chen was referring to were naturally Qin Shiru and the other girls, as well as Xiao Qing, Bai Rui Qinyao and Qin Luo. They didn't know anything, so the will of the heavenly way had no reason to kill them. Let them go. That was what Xiao Chen wanted to express. He only thought about the safety of Qin Shiru and the other girls. As for himself, Xiao Chen had no other choice now. Even if he was in the immortal state, so what? Xiao Chen was still far from being a match for the will of the heavenly way, especially in the 7th wilderness, which was the home of the will of the heavenly way. Xiao Chen's meaning was very clear. If there was anything, just come at him. He only hoped that the will of the heavenly way would let Xiao Chen go. However, no one expected that after hearing this, the will of the heavenly way smiled slightly and said, "It's okay. If you don't know, then just know. It's a good opportunity for everyone to share their opinions." As he said that, the will of the heavenly way pointed in the air. Then, several rays of light entered the glabella of the girls present. Immediately, the girls' eyes lost focus. The will of the heavenly way naturally didn't do this to kill them. Instead, he used some kind of secret technique to directly instill a video into everyone. As for the content of the video, Xiao Chen had already guessed it. Gritting his teeth, Xiao Chen looked at the will of the heavenly way with a cold expression and shouted, "Why? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1573. The will of the heavenly way directly instilled the information into Qin Shiru and the other girls. Without a doubt, it was related to the power of all living beings, so that the girls would know the truth of the world. Originally, the girls didn't know that the world enslaved all living beings. If that was the case, the will of the heavenly way would have a reason not to kill them. But now that the girls knew the truth, it was a completely different matter. Would the will of the heavenly way let them go? To put it bluntly, the will of the heavenly way had no intention of letting Xiao Chen and his family go. Xiao Chen's eyes were filled with intense killing intent. He finally saw through the will of the heavenly way's thoughts. But in the face of Xiao Chen's angry glare, the will of the heavenly way didn't seem to mind at all and smiled. Xiao Chen, you haven't answered my question yet. Since you already know everything, what do you think? I think you're a motherf ***. Faced with the will of the heavenly way's question, Xiao Chen roared angrily and immediately rushed towards the will of the heavenly way. At the same time, his immortal-level aura soared into the sky. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen's attack was directly broken by the will of the heavenly way as soon as he took a step forward. The will of the heavenly way gently pointed a finger, and then gently tapped it. Suddenly, Xiao Chen felt an irresistible pressure fiercely pressing down on him. The will of the heavenly way looked at Xiao Chen with a gentle smile and said indifferently, "You're disrespecting the heavens. Kneel." As he said that, the will of the heavenly way gently pressed down with his finger. Then, Xiao Chen's knees went forward without any resistance, and he directly knelt in front of the will of the heavenly way. Xiao Chen didn't have any resistance. Even though he had broken through to the immortal realm and condensed the heavenly immortal manner, he still couldn't resist the will of the heavenly way. Xiao Chen still stared at the will of the heavenly way with murderous eyes and shouted angrily, "They don't know anything. Why? If you want to kill them, just kill me alone is enough. They don't know anything." Why, originally, the will of the heavenly way didn't know anything. But why did the will of the heavenly way take the of the heavenly way's initiative to let them know the truth? Of the way's reason? Of the heavenly ways of the heavenly ways them know the truth? It was obvious that he also wanted to kill them. Facing Xiao Chen's angry shout, the will of the heavenly way said indifferently, "According to your words, if you don't remove the roots, the weeds will grow again when the spring breeze comes. So naturally, you can't leave any hidden dangers behind." How ruthless! Just because of such a small matter, the will of the heavenly way wanted to kill Xiao Chen and his family. Hearing this, Xiao Chen struggled with all his might, but it was useless. At this moment, Qin Shuru and the other 3 girls, as well as his parents, were all receiving the information transmitted to them by the will of the heavenly way. Judging from the changes in their expressions, they obviously experienced something unbelievable, just like Xiao Chen when he just learned the truth. Damn it. The will of the heavenly Tao said with a smile, damn it, heaven and earth were born together with the ability of all living beings. But later on, heaven and earth enslaved all living beings. Heaven and earth were heartless and deceived all living beings, making the saints believe in heaven and earth. Heaven and earth were unfair, and the saints were deceived. That must be what you're thinking right now, right? After hearing this, Xiao Chen continued to struggle, trying to break free from the will of the heavenly way's shackles. He had no intention of replying at all. Seeing this, the will of the heavenly way didn't mind and allowed Xiao Chen to struggle. At the same time, he continued with a smile. But is that really the case? There are no rules in the world. If all living beings were equal to heaven and earth, what do you think would happen to the world? It would be chaotic. It would be a complete mess. It would be so chaotic that heaven and earth would lose their colors and the sun and moon would lose their light. Therefore, heaven and earth extracted the ancestral spirits of all living beings so that all living beings could live a better life. They became mortals. All of this is actually for the sake of allowing everyone to live a better life. However, there are some people who refuse to accept the will of the heavenly Tao and want to go against the heavens at all times. Tell me, are these people really doing this for the sake of the fairness they speak of? Overthrowing heaven's way. What about after that? They take over heaven's way and continue to govern the 8 barren lands. In that case, what's the difference between them and heaven's way? The will of the heavenly way spoke slowly. Hearing this, Shao Chen shouted angrily, Bullsh *T. You keep saying that you're compassionate. Then why are you doing this? Why won't you let them go? Sacrificing yourself for the greater good. Shao Chen, I used to think highly of you. It can even be said that your performance exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect you to even defeat the heir of the seventh realm. Not bad, but unfortunately, some things can't be turned back. You didn't, and neither did your family. If I let them go today and kill you instead, do you think they'll still believe in heaven and earth in the future? They won't. Since that's the case, why keep them alive? Hearing Shao Chen's angry shout, the will of the heavenly way said indifferently. Today, he had to kill Shao Chen and his family. Hearing this, Shao Chen used almost all of his strength, but he still couldn't break free from the will of the heavenly way's restraint. Just as Shao Chen was struggling to break free, on the other side, Qin Shuru and the other girls, as well as Shao Qing and Bai Ruyue, came to their senses one by one. They regained their senses, but their expressions were the same. They were shocked, incomparably shocked. Involuntarily looking at Shao Chen, Flower Fairy said softly, "Husband, this," she wanted to ask Shao Chen if this was true, but at this moment, before Shao Chen could say anything, the will of the heavenly way spoke first. There's no need to doubt. Everything is true. The will of the heavenly way took the initiative to admit. Hearing this, everyone's eyes fell on the will of the heavenly way. This time, the way they looked at the will of the heavenly way, or rather, the way they looked at the will of the heavenly way, had completely changed. Confusion, doubt, and entanglement. These were the feelings everyone had at this moment. It could be said that they were exactly the same as Shao Chen's. Moreover, Qin Shuru and the other girls were originally talented and intelligent people. They quickly guessed the purpose of the will of the heavenly way. Tian Yu laughed self-deprecatingly. Husband obtained the power of all living beings and saw through the lies of heaven and earth. And you, as the will of the heavenly way, want to get rid of husband, and at the same time, don't you intend to let us go? So before you die you told us the truth, right? Hearing Tian Yu's words, the will of the heavenly way's expression didn't change. He still had a faint smile on his face as he said, "That's right. In order for all living beings to live a better life, your family can only be sacrificed." Sacrifice your mother? Come at me if you dare. Don't mess with my family. As soon as the will of the heavenly way finished speaking, Shao Chen had already shouted angrily. Hearing Shao Chen's angry shout, the will of the heavenly way smiled faintly. You're that angry? Then, when I kill your family in front of you later, will you be able to take it? Please add this to your collection. Monthly vote recommend this. Chapter 1574. The will of the heavenly way said coldly. Upon hearing that, Shao Chen struggled fiercely again, trying to break free from the will of the heavenly way's shackles. Unfortunately, Shao Chen's struggles were useless in the eyes of the will of the heavenly way. The will of the heavenly way looked at Qin Shuru and the other women. A murderous intent flashed in the eyes of the will of the heavenly way, and his expression turned gloomy. You can only blame your bad luck for knowing something you shouldn't know. What's wrong with heaven and earth governing all living beings? Without heaven and earth, how can there be living beings? All living beings worship heaven and earth and believe in heaven and earth. This is the law of heaven and earth. But there are always some people who want to go against heaven and compete with heaven and earth. What a joke! The will of the heavenly way said coldly. To be honest, the will of the heavenly way hated the Hachibra Senkai very much. In his opinion, heaven and earth governing all living beings was the law of heaven and earth, and it was a very normal thing. However, the will of the heavenly way had apparently forgotten one thing, and that was that the so-called heaven and earth rules were completely set by him. Therefore, no matter what, it was his idea, and the saints had no right to choose at all. As if to vent the dissatisfaction in his heart, The will of the heavenly way's expression turned a little sinister as soon as he finished speaking. But in response, Qin Shuru said coldly, "Heaven is unfair. We naturally have to go against heaven and earth." After knowing the truth of the matter, Qin Shuru and the other women's opinions of the will of the heavenly way had changed a lot. In addition, the will of the heavenly way was obviously trying to kill them, so the women naturally couldn't be nice to him anymore. Facing Qin Shuru's scolding, the murderous intent in the will of the heavenly way's eyes intensified. He sneered and said, "Fine, fine, fine. Go against heaven and earth. Since you want to die, don't blame me." With that, the will of the heavenly way pointed his finger. A ray of light flashed and went straight for Qin Shuru. Seeing this, Fei Mei rushed up without hesitation and blocked the ray of light for Qin Shuru. The finger light instantly pierced through Fei Mei's chest without any hesitation. Seeing this, Qin Shuru and the other ladies immediately caught Fei Mei's body. Looking at Fei Mei's pale face, even Qin Shuru's eyes were slightly red. Fei Mei was trying to protect Qin Shuru. Hearing this, Fei Mei forced a smile and said, "Madam, think of a way to escape." Think of a way. Fei Mei's heart meridian was directly shattered. They had no chance of winning against the will of the heavenly way, so Fei Mei's only hope was for Qin Shuru and the others to think of a way to escape. Before she finished speaking, Fei Mei was already dead. Seeing Fei Mei fall, Qin Shuru and the other women burst into tears. Xiao Chen struggled with all her might. At the same time, her eyes were bloodshot. Holding Fei Mei's body, Qin Shuru looked at the will of the heavenly way again. Then, he exchanged glances with Tianyu, Flower Fairy, and Gu Lingyao. Then, the four women attacked the will of the heavenly way at the same time. If they had to think of a way to survive, escaping was definitely out of the question. Now that they had escaped from under the nose of the will of the heavenly way, it was almost impossible. Since there was no way to escape, they could only think of a way to attract others. Qin Shuru and the other women's idea was very simple. It was enough to attract the experts of the heavenly Yin and Taiyang sects and use the aftermath of the battle to attract the attention of others. When the time came, could the will of the heavenly way kill Xiao Chen's family in front of everyone? The will of the heavenly way needed the worship of all living beings, so it was impossible for him to kill Xiao Chen's family in front of everyone for no reason. Seeing Qin Shuru and the other women advancing instead of retreating, the will of the heavenly way smiled. He had already guessed what the women were thinking, but they were too naive. The will of the heavenly way smiled faintly. "You want to lure others here? You're thinking too much. Before I appeared, this cave had been completely sealed. No one in the outside world will know what happened here, so you'd better give up." Naturally, the will of the heavenly way couldn't reveal his true identity in front of everyone, so he was already prepared. Hearing this, Qin Shuru and the other women rushed towards the will of the heavenly way. At the side, Xiao Chen, who was bound by the will of the heavenly way, shouted angrily, "Don't do anything stupid. Hurry up and leave now." Even Xiao Chen wasn't a match for the will of the heavenly way, so it was no different from suicide for the four women to take the initiative to besiege the will of the heavenly way. Xiao Chen shouted anxiously. However, his angry shout couldn't change anything. The will of the heavenly way stretched out his hands slowly, and 4 5-colored radiances surrounded the four women. Then, the 4 5-colored radiances grabbed the four women's bodies like 4 big hands. Then, a huge force rushed towards the 5-colored radiances, and the four women's bodies were crushed. 4 clouds of blood mist exploded in midair, and the four women's figures disappeared. Drops of blood fell on Xiao Chen's body and face as if it were raining blood. Looking at this scene, Xiao Chen was instantly stunned. Dead. The four women were killed by the will of the heavenly way right in front of him. In an instant, Xiao Chen seemed to have lost his soul. Before he could even say a word, the four women had been crushed by the will of the heavenly way. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He couldn't believe everything that had happened before his eyes. He stood rooted to the ground. At the same time, after the will of the heavenly way killed Qin Shi's 4 women, he first glanced at Xiao Chen. Seeing that Xiao Chen was completely stunned, the will of the heavenly way sneered. "Is your state of mind destroyed?" That's right. Now that Qin Shi's 4 women were dead, Xiao Chen's state of mind was destroyed, and he had no interest in continuing to play. The will of the heavenly way turned to Xiao Qing, Bai Ruiyue, Qing Yao, and Qing Luo, and said expressionlessly, "You must be tired after playing for so long. Time to send you on your way." With that, the will of the heavenly way prepared to attack again. Xiao Qing and Bai Ruiyue weren't frightened at all. They clenched their fists, and Bai Ruiyue looked at Xiao Chen with a gentle gaze. They couldn't resist the will of the heavenly way at all. Bai Ruiyue's gaze was fixed on Xiao Chen, and at the same time, the 5-colored radiance of the will of the heavenly way also enveloped Xiao Qing, Bai Ruiyue, and the others. Seeing that everyone was about to be killed like Qin Shiru and the other 3 women, Xiao Chen, who was originally in a daze, suddenly let out a loud cry. However, there was no anger in this loud cry. Instead, it was full of pleading, a strong sense of pleading. Don't. I beg you, don't. I'll agree to any of your conditions. Don't kill them. Please collect, vote, recommend." Chapter 1575. Qin Shiru, Fairy of 100 Flowers, Gu Lingyao and Tianyu. His 4 wives had died in front of him. This was a huge blow to Xiao Chen, and he could not describe it with words. At this moment, Xiao Chen felt as if his heart had been shattered. Tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. Who said that men don't cry easily? That's only because they haven't been heartbroken yet. Seeing his wife die in front of him like this, while he could only kneel in front of the enemy like a stray dog, unable to even move a finger. As a man, he could not even protect his own woman. This was simply the saddest thing in the world. He could clearly see the reluctance in the eyes of Qin Shiru and his 4 wives before they died. They were reluctant to part with Xiao Chen. They were reluctant to be separated from Xiao Chen. They were reluctant to be separated by life and death. Hatred, incomparable hatred. At this moment, the hatred in Xiao Chen's heart had reached a peak. However, in addition to hatred, Xiao Chen also felt a strong sense of powerlessness in his heart. This was a kind of powerlessness that could not produce any resistance. In the face of the will of the heavenly way, Xiao Chen, the first saint of the 7th wilderness, was simply a joke. A joke that even he found funny. It had to be said that Xiao Chen's path had been too smooth since he was young. From the Tianshan continent, from Lingshan County, from birth, Xiao Chen had always been crowned with the light of a genius. Countless people looked up to him and envied him. Although Xiao Chen had encountered many dangers on his path of cultivation, such as the Tianhe continent, the North Star realm, the Central world, and so on. Moreover, many of these dangers had even endangered Xiao Chen's life. It could be said that his life was hanging by a thread. However, no matter which time it was, Xiao Chen had never been like this. There was only helplessness and despair in his heart. In the past, when he encountered setbacks and dangers, Xiao Chen had never felt powerless or desperate. This was because Xiao Chen believed that as long as he did not give up, there would always be a turning point. However, this time, in the face of the will of the heavenly way, Xiao Chen was in despair. In front of the will of the heavenly way, what was he? A grain of sand in the desert, or a drop of seawater in the ocean? He had no ability to resist. In front of the will of the heavenly way, all of Xiao Chen's efforts seemed to be short-lived and could not withstand a single blow. His wives died. Of course. But in the end, nothing had changed. His wives steads, and they had died in front of him. Of Xiao Chen, as their husband, what could he do? He could only crawl in front of the will of the heavenly way like a dog and watch him kill his wives one by one. Xiao Chen hated the will of the heavenly way, but he hated himself even more. He hated himself for being so weak. When faced with the will of the heavenly way, he did not even have the slightest ability to resist. Why? Why was he so weak? Helplessness and despair. At this moment, Xiao Chen's state of mind was completely shattered. Seeing that his parents were about to be killed after his 4 wives, Xiao Chen let go of everything. His dignity, his pride as the first holy son of the 7th wilderness, these were no longer important. For the first time in his life, Xiao Chen lowered his head that he had never been willing to lower. His spine, which had always been as straight as Jian Yi, seemed to have been forcefully bent at this moment. Xiao Chen lowered his head in front of the will of the heavenly way with a face full of tears. He pressed his forehead deeply against the ground, as if he was kneeling and worshipping a god. The flowing water blurred his vision as he spoke in a hoarse voice. "I beg you, let my parents go. They don't know anything. Let them go, and I will agree to any of your conditions." Hearing this, Xiao Chen, who had always been arrogant since he was young, actually knelt in front of the will of the heavenly way like a stray dog, begging the will of the heavenly way to let him go. Xiao Qing and Bai Ruiyue could not stop their tears from falling. Bai Ruiyue was already in tears, while Xiao Qing clenched his teeth and said, "Chen, stand up." Looking at Xiao Chen's appearance, Xiao Qing only felt as if his heart was being squeezed tightly by something. An extreme feeling of grief surged in his heart. No one knew a son better than a father. As a father, Xiao Qing naturally knew how proud his son was. In terms of pride, Xiao Chen was no worse than anyone else. However, it was this arrogant Xiao Chen who was crawling at the feet of others like a dog today. This was something that Xiao Qing had never thought of and was absolutely unacceptable. However, in the face of Xiao Qing's angry shout, Xiao Chen was completely indifferent. Perhaps in Xiao Chen's heart, dignity and face were no longer important. Now, Xiao Chen only had one thought in his heart, and that was to let his parents be safe. Seeing that Xiao Chen didn't listen to his words at all, Xiao Qing shouted angrily, "Stand up! My son is an arrogant genius, not a coward who kneels on the ground." Xiao Qing shouted angrily. At the same time, in the face of Xiao Chen's actions, the will of the heavenly way was slightly stunned. He naturally knew how difficult it was to make a genius like Xiao Chen bow his head. But now, Xiao Chen was really kneeling in front of him and took the initiative to lower his noble head. The will of the heavenly way didn't have the intention of mocking Xiao Chen. On the contrary, his feelings were somewhat complicated. However, he was only stunned for a moment before the will of the heavenly way attacked again. At the same time, he said softly, "Some things are destined and can't be changed. So, your family must die." With that, the will of the heavenly way attacked Xiao Qing and Xiao Chen again. Seeing this, Xiao Chen lifted his head abruptly and shouted. "No!" Xiao Chen howled. Along with Xiao Chen's sorrowful cries, Xiao Qing, Bai Ruiyue, Qin Yao, Si Ju, Lan, and the other girls were all enveloped by the will of the heavenly way's attack. Then, they were blasted to death before they could even scream. Not even their corpses were left behind. Dead. They're all dead. Xiao Chen's family is all dead. Looking at the spot where Xiao Qing and Bai Ruiyue were standing just now, Xiao Chen couldn't make any sound. Even when the will of the heavenly way slowly approached him, Xiao Chen didn't react at all. Looking at Xiao Chen in front of him, the will of the heavenly way said indifferently, "It's useless even if you don't die now. Xiao Chen, I'll be a good person and send your family off." With that, the will of the heavenly way didn't hesitate at all and struck out again, intending to kill Xiao Chen. "I'm going to die." However, in the face of death, Xiao Chen didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. Qin Shuru, his 4 daughters, and his parents were all dead. What was the point of living? Xiao Chen didn't care about the approaching death at all. However, just as the will of the heavenly way's attack was about to land on him, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Chen and blocked the attack for Xiao Chen. After escaping from death, The will of the heavenly way's eyes flashed with coldness when he saw this person appear. "It's you again," author's note. "There's something going on at home today, so I really don't have time to write. I only have 2 chapters left, so I can only update 2 chapters today. I have no choice. It's a very important matter. Brothers, please forgive me. In addition, there's a twist in the plot now. Brothers, you can make a bold guess. Who was the one who saved Xiao Chen?" Chapter 1576. Xiao Chen barely escaped death, but he didn't react at all. He looked at the place where his parents were just now with tears streaming down his face, completely ignoring the person who appeared beside him and saved him. Xiao Chen's state of mind had collapsed, and he was almost like a living corpse. At the same time, the will of the heavenly way stared coldly at the person who saved Xiao Chen. This person was none other than the realm lord of the Hachibra Senkai's 7th realm, Luoli. In response to the cold voice of the will of the heavenly way, Luoli said with an indifferent smile, "The 7th wilderness, TSK. You're still as vicious and merciless as ever. I'm impressed." "Luoli, what exactly do you want?" the will of the heavenly way asked coldly while looking at Luoli. The will of the heavenly way was actually extremely shocked by Luoli's sudden appearance here. How did he break through the defensive line at the entrance of the 7th wilderness? How did he come to the 7th mainland? Although he was puzzled and shocked, now was obviously not the time to dwell on this, because Luoli was already standing in front of him. His primary goal was to figure out his intentions. Looking at the ugly expression of the will of the heavenly way, Luoli said with a smile, "Don't worry, the gate of the immortal domain has only opened a little, so only I can pass through. No one else from the 7th realm has come, and I'm here." With that, Luoli turned to look at Xiao Chen, who was almost like a living corpse, and frowned slightly. His state of mind has collapsed. Luoli naturally appeared here through the gate of the immortal domain. However, because the gate of the immortal domain was sealed by the will of the heavenly way, Luoli could only tear open a small gap in a short period of time to let himself pass through, so no one from the 7th realm could pass through. Only Luoli was here. As for the purpose of Luoli's appearance here, it was obviously for Xiao Chen. Brother Xiao Chen defeated Yu Shujin and obtained the power of living beings. He had now ascended to the immortal realm and formed the heavenly immortal mansion. In Luoli's opinion, Xiao Chen was undoubtedly the #1 candidate for the heir of the 7th realm. And to put it bluntly, when Luoli had blocked the will of the heavenly way, Luoli had already guessed what would happen to Xiao Chen's fate. As an old rival of the will of the heavenly way, Luoli was sure that with the will of the heavenly way's character, since Xiao Chen knew the truth, he would definitely kill Xiao Chen. He would not let him go just because of Xiao Chen's talent. Therefore, from the beginning, Luoli had already regarded Xiao Chen as the heir of the 7th realm. But now it seemed that he was one step too late. Xiao Chen's state of mind had already collapsed. This was not good news. If there was no way to heal him, then Xiao Chen would probably be a walking corpse in the future. How could such a person become the heir of the 7th realm? Seeing Luoli frowning at Xiao Chen, the will of the heavenly way snorted coldly. "Luoli, this person's state of mind has already collapsed. Do you think it's still useful?" His state of mind had collapsed. A walking corpse. Ignoring the will of the heavenly way's words, Luoli frowned and stared at Xiao Chen. After a moment, a gleam flashed across his eyes. He reached out and grabbed at the air. Suddenly, some unknown things in the sky were caught by Luoli. Seeing Luoli's actions, a strange gleam flashed across the will of the heavenly way's eyes. Luoli had actually collected the remnant souls of Qin Shiru and the other girls, as well as Xiao Qing, by Ryue Qing Yao and Qing Luo. Their souls had indeed been directly scattered by the will of the heavenly way, but there were still some remnant souls floating in the air. However, these remnant souls were actually useless and would disappear soon. After collecting them, Luoli looked at Xiao Chen and said indifferently, "Xiao Chen, The feeling of not being able to protect the people around you must be terrible, right? Hearing this, Xiao Chen didn't react at all. He didn't move at all. Seeing this, Luo Li didn't care. He slowly walked behind Xiao Chen and reached out to press Xiao Chen's head. Then, he moved his mouth close to Xiao Chen's ear and said faintly, "Someone once told me that all the tragedies in this world are due to one's lack of ability. You are very weak, so you can't protect your family. However, I can bring them back to life." Luo Li could bring Qin Shuru and the others back to life. Hearing this, the look in Xiao Chen's eyes finally changed. At the same time, the endless death aura on his body fluctuated violently. Sensing the change in Xiao Chen, a smile appeared on Luo Li's face. It seemed that he could still be saved. Resurrection, he could still be resurrected. After hearing Luo Li's words, Xiao Chen no longer cared about Luo Li's identity. He only wanted to bring Qin Shuru and the others back to life. He seemed to see hope again in his heart. At the same time, Luo Li forced Xiao Chen's head to face the will of the heavenly way. Luo Li said indifferently as he forced Xiao Chen to look at the will of the heavenly way. "The heavenly way is unfair. That's why we have to go against it. Xiao Chen, do you hate him?" Luo Li's words seemed to have a magical power. Moreover, when Xiao Chen looked directly at the will of the heavenly way, the hatred in his eyes burst out unreservedly. His eyes were blood-red, and he constantly let out hoarse roars. This sound was like the roars of an injured beast, making people tremble involuntarily. How could he not hate him? He was the one who killed his entire family. Xiao Chen's hands began to struggle unconsciously, as if he wanted to rush up and fight the will of the heavenly way. However, under Luo Li's control, Xiao Chen had no way to break free. The deep and hoarse roars, accompanied by the intense hatred in his red eyes, made Xiao Chen look like an evil spirit that had crawled out of hell. Seeing Xiao Chen's appearance, the will of the heavenly way frowned slightly, while Luo Li smiled faintly. At the same time, Luo Li spoke again to Xiao Chen. "Remember him. Remember his appearance. He was the one who killed your entire family. Weakness is the original sin. If you want revenge, you have to become stronger." Xiao Chen didn't reply after hearing Luo Li's words. Instead, he continued to roar hoarsely. At the same time, the hatred in his red eyes towards the will of the heavenly way was extremely intense. As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Li grabbed Xiao Chen, then glanced at the will of the heavenly way and disappeared on the spot. Luo Li took Xiao Chen away. Seeing this scene, the will of the heavenly way's eyes flashed coldly, but he didn't chase after them. With the gate of the immortal domain, the will of the heavenly way couldn't catch up to them. However, the will of the heavenly way had a bad feeling. Xiao Chen didn't die, which made the will of the heavenly way somewhat unwilling. Judging from Xiao Chen's performance just now, Xiao Chen would probably become the seventh Desolate's mortal enemy in the future. Most importantly, Xiao Chen had obtained the power of living beings. It wasn't good news for such a person to become the mortal enemy of the seventh Desolate. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1577. Xiao Chen was taken away by Luo Li. Although the will of the heavenly way was not happy about this, there was nothing they could do. Xiao Chen's matter could not be made public. In this way, the will of the heavenly way could not fight against Luo Li, because it would attract a lot of attention. Moreover, with Luo Li's strength, he was not afraid of the will of the heavenly way. Everyone thought that the world was the strongest. However, warriors at Luo Li's level could no longer be suppressed by the world. Luo Li took Xiao Chen all the way to the gate of the immortal area. Then, he forcibly tore the seal of the will of the heavenly way. The two of them directly entered the gate of the immortal area and disappeared. He took Xiao Chen directly to the Black Palace of the Seventh Realm. In the main hall, Luo Li casually threw Xiao Chen aside. Xiao Chen's eyes were fixed on Luo Li's right hand. There was a ball of light on Luo Li's right hand. This ball of light was the remnant souls of Qin Shuru and the others. Although they had lost their consciousness, they were Xiao Chen's only hope now. Luoli had said that he had a way to revive the family members he had chosen. Sensing Xiao Chen's gaze, Luoli glanced at him indifferently. Then, a middle-aged man strangely appeared in the main hall beside Xiao Chen. Looking directly at Xiao Chen, the middle-aged man frowned and said, "Realm Lord, is this the new heir of Kunlun you chose? His state of mind has already collapsed. He's a useless person." At a glance, he could tell that Xiao Chen's state of mind had already collapsed. He was like a living dead. However, upon hearing this, Luoli did not care at all and smiled slightly. "Take him to rest first. Take good care of him. I only have one way." With that, Luoli looked at Xiao Chen again. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Seeing this, the middle-aged man did not say anything. He directly grabbed Xiao Chen and left the main hall. During the whole process, Xiao Chen did not say a word. His eyes were fixed on Luoli's right hand. It was not until the middle-aged man was about to take him away that Xiao Chen suddenly struggled. Apparently, he was unwilling to leave the remnant souls of Qin Shuru and the others. After being rescued by Luoli, Xiao Chen was brought back to the seventh realm. In the seventh wasteland, the people of the Tianyin and Taiyang sects were completely unaware of what had happened yesterday. No one would have thought that Xiao Chen's family had been wiped out last night. Only Xiao Chen was rescued by Luoli. No one noticed anything strange, but very soon, a piece of news that shocked everyone spread. Moreover, it came from the will of the heavenly Tao. Xiao Chen defected to the seventh realm and killed his father and wife. Last night, he killed 4 of his wives, his parents, and 6 of his personal maid. Finally, he fled the seventh wasteland with Luoli, the realm lord of the Hachibra Senkai's seventh realm. This news came from the will of the heavenly way. Once it spread, everyone was stunned. How could this be possible? Brother Xiao Chen defected? After the incident in the northern underworld immortal realm, Xiao Chen was now recognized as the first saint of the seventh palace. But no one expected that Xiao Chen would defect. Moreover, he killed his own wife and parents. This was simply the act of a beast. Everyone was shocked, but at the same time, some people couldn't believe it. They didn't believe that Xiao Chen would do such a thing. Dragon Clan. Lin Qing's first reaction after hearing this news was disbelief. In the hall, Long Qing looked at Long Yang and the Dragon Emperor in front of him and said firmly, "Impossible. Little brother would never do such a thing. I don't believe it." Long Qing had a very deep relationship with Xiao Chen. At the same time, he also knew what kind of person Xiao Chen was. With Xiao Chen's love for his 4 daughters and filial piety to his parents, how could Xiao Chen do such a thing? It was absolutely impossible. Long Qing wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Hearing this, Long Yang nodded and said, "I also think it's impossible. Brother Xiao Chen is not such a person." Long Yang and Long Qing didn't believe that Xiao Chen would do such a thing. However, the Dragon Emperor frowned and said, "Father doesn't believe it either. But this matter was said by the will of the Heavenly Way himself. Could it be that the will of the Heavenly Way would frame Xiao Chen?" The Dragon Emperor's words clearly showed the will of the Heavenly Way's position in the hearts of all living beings. Just as the will of the Heavenly Way said, it was a fact that all living beings respected and feared the heavens and the earth. Therefore, even in the face of such unbelievable news, the Dragon Emperor still didn't doubt the will of the Heavenly Way. The heavens and the earth couldn't be wrong, and all living beings had to obey the will of the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth were righteous. This was a mark deeply engraved in all living beings. Long Yang didn't say anything after hearing the Dragon Emperor's words. Clearly, his thoughts were also a bit uncertain. This matter was said by the will of the Heavenly Way, but would the will of the Heavenly Way lie? Or would the will of the Heavenly Way frame Xiao Chen? In Long Yang's opinion, the will of the heavenly way clearly wouldn't do such a thing. Long Yang was a bit hesitant, but after a moment of silence, Long Qing suddenly said, "I'm going to the Taiyang sect of the heavenly way and ask the will of the heavenly way face to face." Long Qing also believed in the will of the heavenly way, but she also believed in Shao Chen. She felt that Shao Chen definitely wouldn't do such a thing, so she had to go to the Taiyang sect of the heavenly way and ask the will of the heavenly way face to face. The Dragon Emperor didn't stop Long Qing from going to the Taiyang sect of the heavenly way, and Long Yang took the initiative to say, "I'll go with you." Not only Long Qing, but Xianyuan Ling also received the news in the Xianyuan clan. His first reaction was the same as Long Qing's. He didn't believe it either. How could Shao Chen do such a thing? As Shao Chen's brother, Xianyuan Ling knew very well what kind of person Shao Chen was. How could he do such a thing? In the hall of the Xianyuan clan's manor, Xianyuan Ling looked at Xianyuan Songtao and said, "Uncle, I'm going to the Taiyang sect of the heavenly way and ask about what happened. I believe that third brother absolutely wouldn't do such a thing." Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing's decision was surprisingly consistent. Both of them wanted to ask the will of the heavenly way face to face. They didn't believe that Shao Chen would actually kill his father and wife. Seeing the resolute look on Xianyuan Ling's face, Xianyuan Songtao sighed softly. He also knew a little about Shao Chen, but he didn't doubt the will of the heavenly way. Xianyuan Songtao pondered for a moment and then said indifferently, "All right, it's also good to go and find out what happened." Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1578. Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing didn't believe that Shao Chen would do such a cruel and crazy thing, so the two of them decided to go to the Taiyang sect in person and ask the will of the heavenly way what happened. Not only Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling, but also the others who were familiar with Shao Chen, such as Shao Xing, Chen Yu, Emperor Qing, and the others. Even the Divine Lord and Tian Mushi came to the Taiyang sect. Within a day, everyone rushed to the Taiyang sect and told Yinyangzi that they wanted to meet the will of the heavenly way, but there was no reply. Naturally, the will of the heavenly way couldn't be met just because they wanted to. Therefore, after making the request, everyone stayed in the Taiyang sect. At the same time, they went to Shao Chen's cave to check. Ever since the news of Shao Chen's defection spread, Shao Chen's cave was sealed. Everything was still the same as that night. They couldn't see the corpses. After all, Qin Shuru, Shao Qing, and Bai Ruyue were all directly blasted into a bloody mist by the will of the heavenly way. There seemed to be a faint smell of blood in the air. Long Yang, Long Qing, Xianyuan Ling, the Divine Lord, and Tian Mushi looked around, but they didn't find any clues. They didn't find anything valuable in Shao Chen's residence. After a night of silence, early the next morning, Yinyangzi personally found everyone and said that the will of the heavenly way agreed to meet them. After receiving this news, Long Qing, Xianyuan Ling, and everyone else were excited. If they could meet the will of the heavenly way, they could ask what happened that day. Yinyangzi personally led everyone to the main hall of the Taiyang sect. Along the way, his mood was extremely complicated. To be honest, he did not believe that Shao Chen would do such a thing. Therefore, he also hoped to see the will of the heavenly way personally and ask him what had happened. In the seventh mainland, Yinyangzi was probably the closest to Shao Chen, and the great sage who understood Shao Chen the best. The great sage also knew Shao Chen, but they weren't familiar with him. Many of them had only interacted with him before, including Xianyuan Songtao. Therefore, after the will of the heavenly way announced that Shao Chen had defected, the great sage chose to believe him without any hesitation. After all, under their encouragement, heaven and earth represented justice, and the will of heaven and earth was the will of all living beings. Yinyangzi was the only one who still had doubts. The group arrived at the main hall of the Taiyang sect. When everyone arrived, the will of the heavenly way had yet to appear. They did not dare to be presumptuous, and could only wait quietly in the middle of the main hall. After about 15 minutes, the will of the heavenly ways figure slowly appeared on the main seat in the middle of the main hall. Seeing the will of the heavenly way appear, everyone bowed. Seeing this, the will of the heavenly way said calmly, "I know why you are here today." Without any nonsense, the will of the heavenly way pointed a finger at his collar. Immediately, several 5-colored rays of light entered the space between everyone's eyebrows. With the entry of the 5-colored rays of light, the scene of that night appeared in front of everyone's eyes. In the night, Shao Chen's face was cold as he personally killed Qin Shuru, Shao Qing, Bai Ryue, and the others. During the entire process, Luoli also watched from the side. After Shao Chen killed everyone, Luoli took the two of them and left. The scene ended there. This was naturally not the truth of the matter, but with the will of the heavenly ways means, it was not difficult to fake such a scene. On the contrary, it was very simple. After showing everyone this fake scene, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and even Yin Yangzi revealed a complicated look in their eyes. How was this possible? How was this possible? How could Shao Chen do such a thing? Why? Everyone had such doubts in their hearts. Seeing this, the will of the heavenly way, who was sitting on the main seat, began to speak. Shao Chen is the first holy son of the seventh wilderness. I have always had high hopes for him, but who would have thought that this child actually had contact with the seventh realm's realm lord, Luoli, and defected? Now, the middle-aged man you see in the scene is the Hachibra Senkai's seventh realm's realm lord, Luoli. He was also the one who took brother Shao Chen away from the seventh wilderness. It was completely irresponsible and confusing the truth. From the will of the heavenly way's mouth, the whole matter became that Shao Chen had defected to the seventh realm. For some unknown reason, he killed his family and finally left with Luoli. Hearing the will of the heavenly way's words, the look in Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing's eyes became more and more complicated. This was impossible. Why? Why would third brother defect to the Hachibra Senkai? Moreover, even if he had defected to the Hachibra Senkai, he wouldn't have killed his wife and parents with his own hands, right? It seemed that the evidence was conclusive, but Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing still didn't believe it, because in their hearts, Shao Chen was simply not someone who would do such a thing. Shao Chen's relationship with Qin Shuru and his 4 daughters, and Shao Chen's filial piety to his parents, were all seen by Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. How could a husband who doted on his wife so much, and a son who was so filial, kill his father and wife? There were still doubts in their hearts, so no one responded to the will of the heavenly way. In response, a cold light flashed in the will of the heavenly way's eyes, but it was only a flash, and then he said indifferently, "Well, let's not talk about Shao Chen for now. Today, I came here not only because of your request but also because of another reason. You should all know about the gate of the immortal realm. Now the situation in the seventh wilderness is very dangerous, especially in the seventh mainland. Because the gate of the immortal realm is on the seventh mainland, I want to forcibly increase your strength. Only in this way can you deal with the attack from the seventh realm. Now relax your minds and don't resist. I will give you a spiritual energy empowerment." The will of the heavenly way took the initiative to change the topic, indicating that everyone should stop talking about Shao Chen. He also proposed to increase everyone's cultivation in order to deal with the war that could break out in the seventh mainland at any time. Hearing this, although everyone was still full of doubts, they didn't say anything, including Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. Everyone sat cross-legged and closed their eyes, waiting for the spiritual energy empowerment from the will of the heavenly way. Seeing that everyone was sitting cross-legged, a smile flashed in the will of the heavenly way's eyes, and then he said slowly, "Relax your mind. Remember, during the whole process, don't resist at all. Please add, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 1579. The spiritual energy infusion helped everyone increase their cultivation. No one doubted the will of the Heavenly Way's words. Therefore, even Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing followed the will of the Heavenly Way's words and relaxed their mind. They trusted him completely and did not put up any defenses. Soon, everyone felt a mysterious power enter their bodies. At first, no one had any special reaction to the appearance of this power. However, after just a dozen breaths, everyone felt this power rush into their mind. Caught off guard and completely defenseless, everyone lost consciousness in an instant. In fact, no one knew that the will of the Heavenly Way was tampering with everyone's memories at this time. It deeply imprinted the matter of Shao Chen killing his parents in everyone's minds as if they had seen it with their own eyes. Moreover, the will of the Heavenly Way had buried hatred for Shao Chen in everyone's hearts. To put it simply, after this memory tampering, if everyone present met Shao Chen again, they would no longer remember their past with Shao Chen. They would only treat Shao Chen as their mortal enemy. Tampering with memories was something that only experts at the level of the will of the Heavenly Way and Luoli could do. Even an almighty figure like the Wine Taoist could not do this. However, there was a very important condition to tampering with a person's memories. The person being tampered with must not have any resistance or resistance. Otherwise, it would be impossible to tamper with the memories. If the tampering continued, the person being tampered with would probably become mentally retarded. Therefore, this method of tampering with memories was basically useless under normal circumstances. It was because of this harsh condition that the will of the Heavenly Way did not choose to tamper with Shao Chen's memories. Otherwise, as long as Shao Chen's memories were tampered with, Shao Chen would naturally not know the truth. Of course, Shao Chen could not cooperate with the will of the Heavenly Way to tamper with his memories. However, the real reason was that Shao Chen had refined the power of living beings and had condensed the ancestral spirit in his body. The will of the Heavenly Way could not tamper with his memories. Even if Shao Chen cooperated, the will of the Heavenly Way could not do this. Therefore, it could only choose to kill Shao Chen. As for Qin Shuru and the other girls, the will of the Heavenly Way did not care about them at all. It was not worth it to tamper with their memories. After all, tampering with memories was a very taxing task. It was very tiring. For example, right now, dense beads of sweat had already appeared on the forehead of the will of the Heavenly Tao. To tamper with a person's memories without harming that person's mind, this was definitely a technical job. The slightest bit of carelessness could cause irreversible damage. It was also because there was no other way that the will of the Heavenly Way chose to tamper with everyone's memories. Everyone present was close to Shao Chen. Moreover, Long Qing, Long Yang, Tian Mushi, the Divine Lord, Xianyuan Ling, and Yin Yangzi were all famous figures in the Seventh Mainland. Shao Chen had already defected. If the will of the Heavenly Way killed these people at this time, even a pig would definitely notice that something was wrong. These people could not be killed, so he could only tamper with their memories. The will of the Heavenly Way also knew that he could not deceive them for long. With Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, and the others' relationship with Shao Chen, the truth would come to light as soon as they saw Shao Chen. Therefore, it was better to be a little more tired. Tampering with their memories was the safest way. After more than 10 hours, the will of the Heavenly Way exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and was finally considered to be done. After successfully tampering with everyone's memories, the will of the Heavenly Way's face turned a little pale, but the corners of his mouth curved into a cold smile. Now, even if Shao Chen was fine, if they met again in the future, no one would believe him, including his best friends, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. Seeing that the people still did not wake up, the will of the Heavenly Way smiled coldly and disappeared from the hall. In order to maintain his image, the will of the Heavenly Way had indeed gone to great lengths. However, there was no other way. The heavens and the earth were equal, but the heavens and the earth had told them a big lie. Moreover, the heavens and the earth needed the power of all living beings, so the will of the heavenly way needed the trust of all living beings. After a lie, more lies were needed to make up for it. After more than half an hour, Yangzi was the first to wake up. Then, a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. He looked around and muttered, "Why am I here?" He had no idea why he was in the great hall of the heavenly Sun sect, nor did he know that he had met the will of the heavenly way. Following Yangzi's awakening, the Divine Lord, Tianmushi, Long Yang, Long Qing, Xianyuan Ling, and the others woke up one after another. Each and every one of them had a perplexed look on their faces. However, this perplexity was quickly replaced by the hatred in their hearts. With their memories tampered with, everyone seemed to have seen Shao Chun kill his father and wife with their own eyes. Xianyuan Ling's eyes were filled with hatred as he said, "Shao Chun, I, Xianyuan Ling, have always regarded you as a brother of life and death. I didn't expect you to do such a thing. From today onwards, I, Xianyuan Ling, sever all ties with you. In the future, I will spend the rest of my life killing you to avenge my adoptive parent." The adoptive parents that Xianyuan Ling mentioned were naturally Shao Qing and Bai Riyue. It could be seen that Xianyuan Ling's killing intent was not fake at all. He really wanted to sever all ties with Shao Chun and really wanted to kill Shao Chun. As Xianyuan Ling's voice fell, Long Qing also said fiercely, "Big brother is right. From today onwards, I will sever all ties with Shao Chun, this bastard. I will kill him in the future." Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing shouted. Then, everyone present echoed, including Yangzi. It could be seen that everyone's hatred for Shao Chun had reached a peak. They wanted nothing more than to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Now that the memories had been tampered with, everyone had already regarded Shao Chun as someone who was worse than a dog and a beast who had killed his own father and wife. Unaware that everyone's memories had been tampered with by the will of the heavenly way, Shao Chun was currently in the Seventh Realm's Black Palace. Several days had passed and Shao Chun had not taken a single step out of his room. Of course, there were also experts from the Seventh Realm guarding outside Shao Chun's room. On this day, as usual, Shao Chun sat alone in his room, motionless, as if he was dead. At this moment, the door was pushed open and Luoli walked in. This was the first time that Luoli had seen Shao Chun since he had brought Shao Chun back to the Seventh Realm's palace. However, when he saw Shao Chun for the first time, even Luoli could not help but be stunned. It could be said that his hair had turned white overnight. At this moment, Shao Chun's hair had turned white overnight. His hair was as white as snow, and he looked demonic, lonely, and sad. Not only that, but Shao Chun's eyes had also turned from black to blood red. The red was so bright that it made people's hearts palpitate. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.